The whip cracked once in the hot Texas air, not to strike, but to silence. The crowd in Bellstone's dusty square stiffened at the sound. It was Market Day 1878, a time when the wounds of the Civil War still festered beneath the thin scabs of reconciliation. Clara flinched anyway. She stood on the wooden platform outside the saloon, 12 years old, but looking younger in her dirt-stained dress that hung in tatters from her thin frame. Her bare feet were caked with dust, her dark curls matted against her scalp. But it was her eyes that drew attention, deep brown, wide, and holding more sorrow than any child's should. "Last one of the day," called Harlan Coyle, his voice carrying across the square. His Confederate captain's badge, tarnished but still visible on his worn coat, caught the afternoon sun. The long scar that ran from his left ear down his neck, a souvenir from Gettysburg, pulled tight as he smiled. "Strong for her size, knows her place, won't cause trouble." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Cowboys adjusted their hats lower. Merchants suddenly found interest in their ledgers, and the few women present turned away. Not because they didn't care, but because they knew better. Children were trouble mouths to feed, bad luck to take in, and worse luck to ask questions about. Harlan's hand remained clamped around Clara's wrist, his fingers digging into her skin. She didn't struggle. She had stopped fighting months ago after they'd taken her mother. "Starting at $8, Harlan called. "Good labor contract here, all legal and proper." Clara's hands balled into fists. She wasn't labor. She wasn't a contract. She was Clara, daughter of Lita, a free woman who had been told there was honest work out west, just a housekeeper position. A woman who never returned. The silence stretched uncomfortably across the square. No one stepped forward. No one met Clara's eyes. $6 then, Harlan muttered, his smile slipping. "She ain't sick." Still silence, broken only by the distant whinny of horses and the creak of a windmill on the edge of town. Clara felt something twist in her stomach. Not hope. Hope had been beaten out of her. It was something else. Something cold and terrible. If no one wanted her, what would Harlan do? Then boots echoed across the packed dirt. Slow, deliberate, heavy. The crowd parted for a tall figure making his way toward the platform. The man's presence commanded attention not just in height, but in bearing. His dark blue coat, faded from years of sun and wear, marked him immediately as former Union. His broad shoulders carried the weight of authority, and the wide-brimmed hat, pulled low, couldn't hide the jagged scar that ran through his right eyebrow down to his cheekbone. Major Thatcher Reed had come to town. The whispers started immediately. "That's the one-armed Union man from that homestead north of Cross Creek. Lost his arm at Antietam, they say. Calls his place Freedom's Edge, if you can believe it." Thatcher stopped at the foot of the platform. He didn't look at Harlan. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked directly at Clara and frowned. "What's her name?" he asked, voice quiet but cutting. Harlan blinked, thrown off his rhythm. "Don't matter, she don't talk much." Thatcher's eyes narrowed slightly. "I asked her name." Harlan's grip on Clara's wrist tightened. "You want her or not, Reed? I got other interested parties." Clara held Thatcher's gaze for a breath, then another. There was something in his eyes that wasn't in the others who had looked at her before. Not pity, not cruelty, but something else. Something like recognition. "How much?" Thatcher asked. Harlan named a price too high for a child, meant to scare off buyers who might ask questions. Thatcher didn't blink. He reached into his coat with his left hand, his only hand, and produced a small leather pouch. He dropped it on the platform step without looking down. "Come on," he said to Clara, his voice neither gentle nor harsh, just matter-of-fact. Clara didn't move. She had learned the hard way that orders could be traps. Harlan moved to shove her forward. "Go on, girl." Thatcher stepped between them so fast, the dust didn't have time to settle. "She walks on her own," he said, his voice dropping lower, "or there's no deal." Harlan's eyes flicked to Thatcher's empty right sleeve, then to the holstered Remington at his hip. He released Clara's wrist. Clara hesitated only a moment before her legs carried her down the steps. She landed beside Thatcher, unsteady but upright. "Your name?" he asked, quieter now that the transaction was complete. Her lips parted. She hadn't said it aloud in so long. "Clara," she whispered the word rough from disuse. He nodded once, then turned. Clara followed, feeling the crowd's eyes on her back as they walked away from the platform. No one spoke. No one intervened. The people of Bellstone went back to pretending nothing had happened the way they always did. Thatcher's horse waited at the edge of town, a sturdy bay gelding with a white blaze down its face, already saddled with a bundled bag tied behind. Thatcher helped Clara up, not like a child, but like someone he expected to hold on. She did her thin arms wrapping around his waist as they rode out of Bellstone. They rode west through low hills and scattered oak trees until the sun dropped behind the horizon and the stars opened across the Texas sky. Finally, Thatcher stopped near a creek, dismounted, and helped Clara down. He didn't ask if she was hungry. He just handed her a strip of jerky and a piece of hardtack, then started a fire with practiced movements. Clara sat on a fallen log and stared at the flames. Thatcher sat nearby but kept his distance. The only sounds were the crackling fire, the gentle rushing of Dead Horse Creek, and the occasional hoot of an owl. "You from Bellstone?" he finally asked. "No," Clara said, her voice small but steady. He nodded. "Parents?" Clara stared at the fire. After a moment she whispered, "My mama was sold. They said it was work. She never came back." Thatcher didn't speak. He just looked at the fire and added another stick. "She had a ribbon," Clara continued, the words coming easier now. "Red. Said it came from a copy of the Emancipation Proclamation. Said it meant freedom." She bit her lip. "Said she'd give it to me when I was old enough. I ain't seen it since they took her." The wind shifted, carrying sparks into the night sky. "You still got family somewhere?" Thatcher asked. Clara shook her head. "You do now," he said, standing. "We ride at dawn." She blinked, confusion crossing her face. "What?" Thatcher met her eyes. "I don't buy children," he said simply. "I free them." With that, he walked toward his horse, leaving Clara alone by the fire, clutching the hardtack tighter than before. That night, she didn't sleep much, not because of fear, but because her heart wouldn't stop racing. Because, for the first time since her mother vanished, someone had spoken to her like she was real, like she mattered. And somewhere deep inside, a tiny part of Clara began to believe it might be true. Morning came with frost on the grass and steam rising from the creek. They rode for hours across the Texas countryside, through stands of pine and open meadows where wildflowers dotted the landscape despite the late season. Clara watched the land change from her perch behind Thatcher, noting how the hills grew steeper and the trees more numerous. "There," Thatcher said, breaking a long silence as they crested a ridge. Below them, nestled in a valley bordered by a winding creek and a small pine forest, stood a homestead. A sturdy log cabin with a stone chimney. A barn with fresh painted doors. A corral where several horses grazed. A chicken coop, a smokehouse, and a garden plot. But what caught Clara's eye was the tall flagpole near the cabin from which the stars and stripes fluttered in the breeze. "Freedom's Edge," Thatcher said quietly. "My home. Now yours." As they descended into the valley, Clara noticed other details. The cabin was larger than most, with glass windows, a rarity in these parts. The barn had been built with care, each board aligned perfectly. The whole place spoke of attention to detail of someone who took pride in their work. When they reached the gate, Thatcher dismounted and opened it one-handed with practiced ease. He led his horse through Clara, still riding, then closed it behind them. Only then did he help her down. "Can you walk all right?" he asked, noticing her wince as her bare feet hit the dirt. She nodded, though her soles were cracked and sore. Thatcher frowned slightly, but didn't press. "Come on, then. You must be hungry." The cabin's interior was simple but comfortable. One main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a cast-iron stove, a table with 4 chairs and shelves lined with books. A ladder led to a loft above. What struck Clara most was the cleanliness. No layers of dust, no cobwebs in corners, everything in its place. She stood awkwardly by the door, afraid to touch anything. "Sit," Thatcher said, gesturing to the table as he hung his hat on a peg. "I'll make something to eat." Clara perched on the edge of a chair, watching as Thatcher moved around the kitchen with surprising efficiency for a one-armed man. He took off his coat, revealing the empty sleeve on his right side, neatly pinned up at the elbow. Clara tried not to stare, but curiosity got the better of her. "Antietam," Thatcher said without looking up, sensing her gaze. "September 17th, 1862. Bloodiest day of the war." Clara looked down at her hands. "Does it still hurt?" Thatcher paused in his work. "Sometimes, when it rains, or when I remember." He continued slicing bread. "War takes things, Clara. Then you learn to live with what's left." He set a plate before her, bread, cheese, and dried apple slices. Clara stared at it, then at him, unsure. "Eat," he said, sitting across from her with his own plate. "It's yours." Clara took a small bite, then another, hunger quickly overcoming caution. Thatcher ate slowly, watching her without being obvious about it. "Was he—" She finally asked the question that had burned inside her since Bellstone. "Why'd you take me?" Thatcher set down his cup of water. "I've seen too many children sold," he said, his voice steady. "During the war, after. Didn't stop it then." He paused, meeting her eyes. "Thought maybe I could now." "That all?" she pressed, sensing there was more. Thatcher's jaw tightened slightly. "You looked like someone who needed a place to be, more than a name on a bill of sale." Clara stared at her plate. After a moment she whispered, "They said I was like her. My mama. They said I had her eyes, and that made it worse. That's why Harlan took me after." She bit her lip. "I thought maybe God forgot about me." Thatcher's knuckles whitened around his cup. "He didn't," he said firmly. "But some men pretend he don't see. Those are the ones who need reminding." After supper, Thatcher showed Clara the loft. There was a small bed with clean sheets, a chest for clothes, and a window that looked out over the valley. A Bible sat on a small table beside the bed. "You read?" Thatcher asked. Clara shook her head, embarrassed. "I'll teach you," he said simply. "If you want." Clara touched the quilt on the bed like it might disappear. "Do I work here?" she asked quietly. "Like a hand." Thatcher hesitated. "No." "Then what am I?" He didn't blink. "You're Clara Reed," he said. "That's enough." Then he left her with that name echoing in her ears like the most beautiful lie she'd ever heard. She didn't sleep much that night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the cabin, the creak of floorboards, the soft murmur of Thatcher reading his Bible downstairs, the distant hoot of an owl. Everything felt too big, too open after months of being locked in Harlan's shed or transported in crowded wagons. Morning came soft and gray. Clara climbed down the ladder to find Thatcher already awake, coffee brewing on the stove. "Sleep well?" he asked. Clara nodded, though it wasn't entirely true. "Eat," he said, gesturing to a plate of cornbread and honey. "Then we start." "Start what?" "Learning," Thatcher said. "Reading, writing. This place." He looked at her steadily. "Unless you'd rather not." Clara sat at the table. "When will you send me away?" She asked the question that had been burning in her mind all night. "When will you get tired of me?" "When I mess up." Thatcher's eyes sharpened. "You will mess up," he said. "So will I. That's life. Doesn't mean I throw you away. But that's what folks do. Not here." The finality in his voice silenced her. After breakfast, Thatcher took a slate and chalk from a shelf. He sat beside Clara at the table and began with the alphabet, patiently showing her each letter, its sound, its shape. Clara watched his large hand guide the chalk, noting how steady it was, despite everything it must have seen and done. "Everyone messes up, Clara," Thatcher said quietly as they worked, "but folks don't quit on family because of it." Clara's head snapped up at the word family. Thatcher didn't meet her gaze, just continued with the lesson, as if he hadn't just reshaped her entire world with a single word. That afternoon, Thatcher showed Clara around the homestead. The barn housed 2 horses, besides his gelding Valor, a milk cow Bessie, and a goat with twin kids. The chicken coop held a dozen hens and 1 rooster. The smokehouse was half full with preserved meat. The garden, though late in the season, still produced squash beans and hardy greens. "Winter's coming," Thatcher explained as they walked the property line. "We'll need to prepare. Chop wood, preserve food, mend clothes." He glanced at her bare feet. "And get you proper boots." Clara nodded, taking it all in. The idea of "we" was as foreign to her as this place, but something about it warmed her despite the chill in the air. As the sun began to set, they returned to the cabin. Clara noticed Thatcher looking toward the flagpole, his expression solemn as the day's last light caught the stars and stripes. "Why do you fly it?" she asked. "Most folks around here don't seem to like it much." Thatcher was quiet for a moment. "Reminds me what we fought for," he finally said. "What we're still fighting for." "Freedom," Clara guessed. "And the promise that all people are created equal." Thatcher's voice carried the weight of someone who had paid dearly for those words. "Some promises take longer to keep than others." Inside the cabin, as Thatcher stoked the fire, Clara noticed a framed photograph on the mantel she hadn't seen before. A beautiful woman, with fair hair and a gentle smile, standing beside a younger Thatcher, with 2 arms in a Union uniform. "Who is she?" Clara asked. Thatcher glanced at the photograph. "Elizabeth," he said softly. "My wife." "Where is she now?" "Gone." He didn't elaborate, and Clara didn't press. That night, after a simple supper, Thatcher took down a book from the shelf. "Lesson time," he said, gesturing Clara closer to the lamp. The book was a primer with simple words and illustrations. For an hour they worked together, Thatcher patiently guiding Clara through the basics of reading. When her eyes grew heavy, he sent her up to the loft. Clara climbed the ladder, pausing at the top to look down at Thatcher, who had returned to his Bible. "Mr. Reed," she called softly. He looked up. "Thank you," she said the words, feeling insufficient for everything that had happened since yesterday. Thatcher nodded once. "Good night, Clara." For the first time in months, Clara slept without fear. In the days that followed, a routine emerged. Mornings began with chores, feeding animals, collecting eggs, fetching water. Then came lessons, reading, writing numbers. Afternoons were for work around the homestead, gardening, mending, preserving food for winter. Evenings were for more lessons, and sometimes stories. Thatcher reading from his Bible or occasionally from other books. Tales of history and courage that Clara soaked up like parched earth in rain. Thatcher was neither harsh nor overly gentle. He had expectations and made them clear, but his patience seemed limitless when it came to teaching. He never raised his voice, never threatened, never made Clara feel small for not knowing things. A week after her arrival, Thatcher presented her with a pair of boots. Sturdy leather, clearly made for a child larger than she was, but stuffed with rags to fit. Clara stared at them in disbelief. "Try them," Thatcher said. Clara slipped them on the first proper shoes she'd had since being taken from her mother. They were heavy and stiff, but the feeling of protection around her feet nearly brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Every person deserves to stand on their own 2 feet," Thatcher replied, with dignity. The boots were just the beginning. In the following days came other necessities. Clean clothes sewn from fabric. Thatcher had stored a warm coat as the weather turned colder, a small comb for her hair. Each item given matter-of-factly without ceremony, but each one another step toward restoring what had been taken from her humanity. As October turned to November, Clara began to believe that perhaps this strange new life might last. She grew stronger, the regular meals filling out her thin frame. She learned quickly, pride blooming in her chest, the first time she read a full page on her own. She even began to smile sometimes, usually when Thatcher wasn't looking. But peace never lasts long on the frontier. It was a crisp November morning when Thatcher announced they needed supplies from town. Not Bellstone, but Cross Creek, a larger settlement, a half-day's ride south. "I'm coming with you," Clara asked, surprised. "You're part of this household," Thatcher said simply. Time folks knew it. They rode double on Valor Clara, now comfortable behind Thatcher. Her new boots fitted in the stirrups he'd adjusted for her. The journey passed mostly in silence, Thatcher occasionally pointing out landmarks or wildlife. Cross Creek proved to be larger than Bellstone, with proper streets, a church steeple, and even a small schoolhouse. But as they rode down the main street, Clara felt the stares, suspicious, judgmental, hostile. A white man with a colored girl riding his horse drew attention, and not the good kind. "Keep your head up," Thatcher murmured as they dismounted in front of the general store. "You've done nothing wrong." Inside the store, the whispers followed them. Clara caught fragments. "That union man from up north. Taking in coloreds now. Heard he's one of them Reconstruction supporters." Thatcher ignored them all efficiently, gathering supplies. Flour, coffee, sugar, ammunition, lamp oil. Clara stayed close, trying to follow his example of dignity under scrutiny. They were at the counter, Thatcher paying, when a heavy hand fell on his shoulder. "Well, if it ain't Major Reed gracing our humble establishment." Thatcher turned slowly. The man before him was tall, well-dressed, with a silver star pinned to his vest. Judge Wallace, according to the whispers that rippled through the store. "Judge," Thatcher acknowledged, with a slight nod. Wallace's eyes slid to Clara, then back to Thatcher. "I see you've taken 2 charity cases." His voice dripped with insinuation. "My ward," Thatcher said evenly. "Clara Reed." The judge's eyebrows rose. "Reed, you giving these people your name now, Major? She has my name because she's under my protection, Thatcher replied, his voice cooling. Legally. Wallace chuckled, but there was no humor in it. Legal's a funny word these days, shifting like sand. He leaned closer. Harlan Coyle was in town yesterday, mentioned a girl gone missing from Bellstone, described her real particular like. Clara felt her heart stop. Thatcher's hand moved slightly, positioning himself between her and the judge. Nothing missing about it, Thatcher said. I have the adoption papers signed by Circuit Judge Federale in San Antonio. Would you care to see them? Wallace's smile faltered slightly. That won't be necessary, for now. He straightened. But Harlan Coyle has powerful friends, Major, and legal documents have been known to disappear in these troubled times. Is that a threat, Judge? Just an observation. Wallace tipped his hat. Good day to you, and to your ward. He strode out, leaving a tense silence in his wake. The storekeeper hurriedly finished their transaction, eager to see them gone. As they loaded their supplies onto Valor, Clara finally found her voice. He's going to tell Harlan where I am, isn't he? Thatcher secured the last bundle before answering. Likely. What do we do? Thatcher helped her onto the horse, then mounted behind her. We prepare, he said simply. As they rode out of Cross Creek, Clara noticed a small church on the outskirts of town. Not the grand white one in the center, but a humble wooden structure with a hand-painted cross. Outside stood a black man in clerical clothes, watching them pass. He nodded slightly to Thatcher, who returned the gesture. Who was that? Clara asked. Reverend Abernathy, Thatcher replied, a good man in a town of few. They were halfway home when Thatcher suddenly reined in Valor, his posture alert. Riders, he said quietly, nodding toward the trees ahead. Clara saw them a moment later, 3 men on horseback, waiting where the road narrowed between 2 hills. Trouble, she whispered. Maybe. Thatcher's hand moved to his saddlebag, where Clara knew he kept his revolver. Hold tight to the saddle horn. If anything happens, you take Valor and ride hard for home. He knows the way. Before Clara could protest, the riders moved into the road, blocking their path. The leader, a scruffy man with a red bandana, raised his hand. That's far enough, friend. Thatcher stopped Valor a safe distance away. Something I can help you with. The man smiled, showing tobacco-stained teeth. Might be. Depends on who you are. Just a man heading home with supplies. And the girl, the man's eyes fixed on Clara. My ward, Thatcher said, his voice hardening slightly. The 3 men exchanged glances. Funny thing, the leader said. We heard tell of a man matching your description. Union coat, missing arm, carrying off property belonging to Captain Coyle. Children aren't property, Thatcher said evenly. Not anymore. The leader's smile vanished. Law says different in these parts, mister. Federal law says otherwise, Thatcher countered. And I'm happy to discuss it with the federal marshals who patrol this territory. A tense silence followed. Clara could feel Thatcher's muscles tighten behind her, ready for whatever might come. Finally, the leader spat into the dirt. You best watch yourself, Union man. Some folks round here don't take kindly to carpetbaggers telling us how to live. I'm not telling anyone how to live, Thatcher replied. Just how not to make others live. With a nod to his companions, the leader moved his horse aside. This ain't over. Rarely is, Thatcher agreed, urging Valor forward. They rode past slowly, Thatcher keeping himself between Clara and the men. No one spoke, but Clara could feel the hostility radiating from them like heat from a fire. Once safely past Thatcher, picked up the pace. putting distance between them and the encounter. "Who were they?" Clara asked when they were out of earshot. "Coil's men," Thatcher replied grimly. "Or hired by him. Will they come to the homestead?" Thatcher was quiet for a moment. "Not today," he finally said. "But soon enough." When they crested the final ridge before freedom's edge, the sight of the cabin and the flag flying above it brought an unexpected lump to Clara's throat. In just a few weeks, this place had become more home to her than anywhere since she'd been with her mother. "Will we have to leave?" she asked, her voice small. Thatcher's arm tightened slightly around her. "No," he said firmly. "This is our home. We defend it." That night after supper, Thatcher brought out a wooden box Clara had never seen before. He placed it on the table and opened it carefully. Inside lay a revolver smaller than his Remington. "Time you learned," he said. Clara stared at the weapon. "To shoot, to defend yourself, to defend your home." Thatcher's eyes were serious. "I hope you never need to, but hope isn't a strategy." He spent the next hour teaching her the basics: how to hold it, how to check if it was loaded, how to aim. He didn't let her fire it yet. That's for daylight away from the cabin, but made her practice handling it until her movements were sure. Before sending her to bed, Thatcher asked a question he'd never asked before. "Do you pray, Clara?" She hesitated. "Mama taught me how, but She looked down. "I stopped. After they took her." Thatcher nodded, understanding. "Might be a good time to start again," he said quietly. "Not because God needs to hear it, because you do." That night, for the first time in a long time, Clara prayed. Not the formal prayers her mother had taught her, but simple words from her heart. For protection, for courage, for this fragile new life, to somehow survive the storm she felt gathering on the horizon. The next morning, Clara woke to the sound of hammering. Looking out her loft window, she saw Thatcher reinforcing the barn door with additional planks. After breakfast, he showed her hiding places within the cabin and barn emergency supplies hidden beneath floorboards and escape routes through the woods. "Are they coming today?" she asked, fear knotting her stomach. "No," Thatcher said. "But preparation isn't panic. It's prudence." That afternoon, as promised, he took her to a clearing behind the barn and taught her to shoot. The revolver's kick was stronger than Clara expected, and her first shots went wild. But Thatcher was patient, adjusting her stance, guiding her aim. "Breathe," he instructed. "Slow and steady. The gun is just a tool. You control it, not the other way around." By the end of the lesson, Clara had hit the tin can target twice, not squarely, but enough to knock it over. Thatcher nodded in approval. "Good," he said. "We'll practice more tomorrow." As they walked back to the cabin, Clara noticed a rider approaching from the direction of Cross Creek. Thatcher saw it too, his hand moving to his Remington. "Inside," he said. "But now, Clara." She ran to the cabin, but couldn't resist peeking through the window as the rider approached. To her surprise, it was the minister they had seen yesterday, Reverend Abernathy. Thatcher's posture relaxed slightly as he recognized the visitor. Clara watched as the two men spoke their conversation too low to hear. After a few minutes, Thatcher nodded and gestured toward the cabin. Clara quickly moved away from the window, trying to appear as if she hadn't been spying. The door opened and Thatcher entered with their visitor. "Clara," he said, "this is Reverend Abernathy from Cross Creek." The Reverend was a tall man with graying hair and kind eyes that had seen much suffering. He smiled at Clara. "Miss Reed," he said, his voice deep and warm. "I've heard about you." "All good things, I hope," she replied cautiously. His smile widened. Indeed, Major Reed speaks highly of your courage. Clara glanced at Thatcher in surprise. He had been talking about her. The Reverend has news, Thatcher said, his expression grave. News we need to hear. Reverend Abernathy took a seat at the table when invited. Harlan Coyle arrived in Cross Creek this morning, he said without preamble, with 6 men. They're staying at Wallace's property. Clara felt her blood run cold. They're saying you kidnapped the girl? Abernathy continued, looking at Thatcher. That she's bound by a labor contract to Coyle. Lies, Thatcher said flatly. Of course, Abernathy agreed, but lies with power behind them. Wallace has called a town meeting for tomorrow. I fear they're forming a posse. Clara looked between the 2 men, panic rising. They're coming for me. For both of you, Abernathy said grimly. Coyle wants the girl. Wallace wants your land. Thatcher's jaw tightened. They won't get either. Abernathy leaned forward. Major, I admire your stand, truly. But you're one man wounded from war against many. You must consider— I have considered, Thatcher interrupted. Every day since Antietam, every day since I saw men die for the promise of freedom. He looked at Clara. Some promises are worth defending. The Reverend sighed. I thought you might say that. He reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope. My wife and I are part of a network. We help people, especially children, escape those who would claim them. Clara's eyes widened. She had heard whispers of such things, an underground railroad that hadn't ended with the war. There's a place in Kansas, Abernathy continued, a community for freedmen and their families. We could get Clara there safely. No, Clara exclaimed, surprising herself with her vehemence. I won't run, not again. Thatcher looked at her thoughtfully. Clara, this is my home now, she insisted, tears threatening. You said so. You said we defend it. A long silence filled the cabin. Finally, Thatcher nodded. We defend it, he agreed. Abernathy looked between them, concern etched on his face. At least let me send word to some friends, former soldiers who believe as you do. They might. No, Thatcher said firmly. I won't bring others into my fight. It's not just your fight anymore, Abernathy pointed out, glancing at Clara. All the more reason to stand, Thatcher replied. Some battles you can't walk away from without losing something more important than the fight itself. As the Reverend prepared to leave, he took Clara's hand. You have courage, child, he said softly, like your mother must have had. Clara blinked in surprise. You knew my mother. A shadow crossed Abernathy's face. I knew many women like her. Promised work, freedom, dignity, then sold into something else entirely. He squeezed her hand. Your stand honors her memory. After Abernathy departed, Clara and Thatcher worked silently, preparing the homestead for what might come. They filled water barrels, secured livestock, loaded weapons, and established signals. As darkness fell, Thatcher checked the perimeter one final time, while Clara prepared a simple supper. When he returned, his expression was grim. When will they come? Clara asked, setting bowls of stew on the table. Soon, Thatcher replied. Perhaps tomorrow. Perhaps the next day. Clara nodded, fighting to keep her hands steady. I'm scared, she admitted. Fear is natural, Thatcher said, sitting across from her. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's action in the face of it. They ate in silence for a while. Then Clara asked the question that had been building since Abernathy's visit. Why did you really take me from Bellstone? The truth. Thatcher set down his spoon, considering her for a long moment. Then he rose and went to the mantel, taking down the photograph of Elizabeth. He returned to the table and placed it before Clara. "Elizabeth wasn't just my wife," he said quietly. "She was Harlan Coyle's sister-in-law. She was married to his brother, a Confederate captain killed at Antietam, possibly by my own men." Clara stared at him, stunned. "After the war, when I returned to Texas to help with Reconstruction, I met her again. She was struggling, her plantation in ruins, her family fortune gone. We found comfort in each other, married in '66. He took a deep breath. "We had a son, Joshua, born in '67. Clara's eyes went to the photograph again, noting now the slight swell of Elizabeth's abdomen easily missed at first glance. "In '70, while I was away working with the Freedmen's Bureau, Harlan came to our home. He took Joshua, 5 years old then, left a note saying it was payment for betrayal. Elizabeth never recovered from the loss. Her heart gave out 2 years later." Thatcher's voice remained steady, but Clara could see the pain etched in every line of his face. "I've spent the last 6 years searching for my son, following every lead, every rumor, freeing other children along the way, hoping—" his voice finally broke. "Hoping I might find him among them." Clara felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "And when you saw me in Bellstone, I saw another child Harlan Coyle was trying to destroy," Thatcher finished. "I couldn't walk away. Not again." Clara reached across the table and took his hand, his only hand, in both of hers. "We'll find Joshua," she whispered. "Somehow." Thatcher's eyes met hers, glistening with unshed tears. "First," he said, "we survive tomorrow." That night, Clara lay awake in her loft, listening to the sounds of the homestead. Familiar now, comforting despite the danger looming. Below, she could hear Thatcher moving about, checking windows, doors, weapons. She thought of all she had learned in the month since Bellstone. How to read simple words. How to milk a cow. How to shoot a revolver. But most importantly, how to be a person again, not property. Whatever came tomorrow, she would face it standing tall, wearing her boots, speaking her name, Clara Reed, with pride. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the promise of the first winter storm. Branches scraped against the cabin walls like fingers testing for weakness. Clara pulled her quilt tighter and finally whispered a prayer her mother had taught her long ago. "Lord, make me strong enough to bear what comes and brave enough to change what I can." In the darkness of the loft, she reached under her pillow and touched the small gift Thatcher had given her that evening. A red ribbon, not her mother's, but a new one. A symbol of promises kept and battles yet to fight. As dawn broke gray and threatening, Clara descended from the loft to find Thatcher already awake, fully dressed, his Remington on the table beside a cup of coffee, gone cold. "They're coming," he said simply, looking up from his Bible. "I saw dust on the ridge." Clara nodded, her heart pounding, but her resolve firm. "I'm ready." Thatcher stood and placed his hand on her shoulder. "Whatever happens today," he said, his voice low and urgent, "remember who you are. Not what they say, not what they want, who you choose to be." "I'm Clara Reed," she said, straightening her spine, "and this is my home." Thatcher's eyes filled with a fierce pride. "Yes," he said, "you are." And together they stepped onto the porch of Freedom's Edge, the American flag snapping in the wind above them, to face whatever came riding down from the ridge. They didn't have to wait long. The riders appeared on the ridge just as the morning mist began to lift. 7 men on horseback silhouetted against the pale November sky. They paused there, a show of force, letting their presence be felt before they began their descent toward freedom's edge. Thatcher handed Clara the small revolver. "Remember what I taught you," he said quietly. "Only if necessary." Clara nodded, the weight of the gun both terrifying and reassuring in her hand. She slipped it into the pocket of her apron, where it would be hidden but accessible. As the riders approached, Thatcher positioned himself on the porch, rifle resting across his forearm, not pointing at the men, but ready. Clara stood slightly behind him, chin up, shoulders back, fighting the instinct to run and hide. The lead rider was Harlan Coyle. Even at a distance, Clara recognized the Confederate captain's badge gleaming on his coat. Beside him rode Judge Wallace, and behind them 5 rough-looking men with rifles across their saddles. They stopped at the gate 30 yards from the cabin. "Major Reed," Harlan called, his voice carrying across the yard. "We've come on official business." "State your business from there," Thatcher replied evenly. Harlan smiled thinly. "Now that ain't neighborly," he gestured to Wallace. "We got the law with us." "Judge Wallace isn't the law," Thatcher countered. "He's a judge, and we both know he has no jurisdiction over federal matters." Wallace's face reddened. "This ain't a federal matter, Reed. It's about stolen property." "Children aren't property," Thatcher said, his voice hardening. "Not under the 13th Amendment, not under the Civil Rights Act of '66, not under any law that matters." Harlan spat into the dirt. "That girl's bound by legal contract to work off her mother's debt. Papers all signed proper." Clara's hands clenched into fists at her sides. Thatcher didn't turn to look at her, but she saw his posture shift, slightly protective. "Any such contract would be void," Thatcher said, "as it was signed under duress if it exists at all. The girl stays here under my protection and guardianship." Wallace leaned forward in his saddle. "We can do this easy or hard, Major. Your choice." "You've made it hard already by coming armed to my property," Thatcher replied. "Now state your real purpose or leave." A tense silence stretched between them. Clara could hear her heart pounding in her ears. The men behind Harlan and Wallace exchanged glances, hands drifting closer to their weapons. Finally, Harlan smiled, a cold, cruel expression that made Clara shiver, despite the morning sun now warming the yard. "You always were self-righteous, Reed," he said, "even when you stole my brother's wife." Thatcher's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond to the bait. "Elizabeth was too good for a Yankee cripple," Harlan continued, his voice dripping with venom. "She died of shame, not heartbreak." Clara saw Thatcher's knuckles whiten around his rifle, but still he held his tongue. "And now you're collecting colored strays," Harlan sneered. "Trying to replace the boy you lost, the boy you couldn't protect." That struck home. Thatcher's body tensed like a bowstring. "Enough," he said, voice dangerously quiet. "You've said your piece. Now get off my land." Wallace intervened, his tone falsely conciliatory. "Major, we're just here to execute the law. The girl has a valid labor contract. Hand her over, and we'll be on our way." "Show me this contract," Thatcher challenged. Wallace reached into his coat and produced a folded document. "Right here, all legal and proper." "Bring it to the porch," Thatcher said. "Just you, Judge, unarmed." Wallace hesitated, then nodded. He dismounted, making a show of leaving his revolver with his horse. As he approached the porch, Clara stepped closer to Thatcher, fear and defiance warring within her. Wallace climbed the steps and held out the paper. Thatcher took it with his left hand, his rifle still ready in the crook of his arm. He glanced at the document, then handed it to Clara. "Can you read it?" he asked quietly. Clara looked down at the paper, focusing on the words as Thatcher had taught her. She recognized her name and her mother's, then dates, numbers, signatures, including one purporting to be her mother's, though Clara knew Lita would never have signed such a thing willingly. "It says," she began, her voice shaking slightly, "it says I'm bound to work for 7 years to pay off a debt of $90. "Do you recognize your mother's signature?" Thatcher asked. Clara stared at the scrawl at the bottom of the page. "That's not her writing," she said with certainty. "Mama wrote beautiful letters. She taught children to read before—" "A forgery, then," Thatcher said loud enough for all to hear. "This contract is fraudulent, Judge. You know it, and I know it." Wallace's face darkened. "Watch your accusations, Major. That's a legal document witnessed by the county clerk." "Then the clerk is complicit in fraud," Thatcher replied calmly. "Either way, Clara stays here." Wallace's artificial politeness evaporated. "You're making a mistake, Reed. A big one." "Not the first," Thatcher agreed. "Won't be the last. But letting you take this child would be worse than any mistake I've ever made." Wallace stepped back, his eyes cold. "We'll be back with more men. Federal papers or not. The people of this county won't stand for a Union man harboring runaways." "She's not a runaway," Thatcher said firmly. "She's my ward, and anyone who tries to take her will answer to me. One crippled soldier against the whole county." Wallace laughed without humor. "Those are poor odds, Major." "I've faced worse," Thatcher replied quietly. Wallace turned and descended the steps. As he walked back to his horse, Harlan caught Clara's eye and smiled a smile that promised retribution. She met his gaze steadily, refusing to show fear. When Wallace remounted, Harlan addressed Thatcher once more. "One day, Reed. You've got 1 day to reconsider. Then we come back, and we won't be knocking polite-like." With that, he wheeled his horse around and led the group back up the ridge. Only when they had disappeared from sight did Thatcher lower his rifle. "Are they really coming back tomorrow?" Clara asked, her voice small. "Yes," Thatcher said grimly. "With more men. What do we do?" Thatcher turned to face her, his expression resolute. "We prepare, and we send for help." Throughout the day they worked to fortify the homestead. Thatcher moved the livestock into the barn, barricaded windows, positioned water barrels strategically in case of fire, and taught Clara where to hide if the worst happened. In the afternoon, Thatcher wrote 2 letters. The first, he explained, was to the federal marshal in San Antonio, detailing the situation and requesting assistance. The second was to Reverend Abernathy, asking him to spread word to trustworthy veterans in the area. "Will they come in time?" Clara asked, as Thatcher sealed the envelopes. "The marshal won't," he admitted. "Too far. But Abernathy might find a few good men willing to stand with us." He handed the letters to Clara. "I need you to take these to the Crossroads Oak. There's a hollow in the trunk on the north side. Put them there. Abernathy's son checks it daily." Clara's eyes widened. "You want me to go alone?" "It's safer than staying here right now," Thatcher said. "If they're watching the homestead, they'll be watching me, not looking for a girl on a pony." He took her to the corral and introduced her to a small, dun-colored pony she hadn't worked with before. This is Scout," he said, saddling the animal with practiced movements. "He knows the trails better than any human. Trust him if you get confused." Clara nodded, swallowing her fear. As Thatcher helped her mount, he pressed something into her hand, a small compass. "North is that way," he said, pointing. "The crossroads is 2 miles. Follow the creek, then head east at the lightning-struck pine. You'll see the big oak standing alone. Can't miss it." "What if someone stops me?" "You're just a girl exercising her pony," Thatcher said. But if there's trouble—" He patted the pocket where she kept the revolver. Clara nodded, straightening in the saddle. "I'll be back before dark." "I know you will," Thatcher said with a confidence that bolstered her own. As Clara rode out following the creek that bordered Freedom's edge, she felt exposed and vulnerable. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every bird call made her start. But Scout moved steadily, his ears alert but not alarmed. The landscape was beautiful, despite her fear. Golden autumn light filtering through the trees, the gentle burble of the creek squirrels darting among fallen leaves. Clara found herself thinking of her mother, who had loved the outdoors and taught Clara the names of plants and birds when she was small. "I'm being brave, Mama," she whispered, "like you taught me." She found the lightning-struck pine without difficulty, its split trunk reaching toward the sky like a gnarled hand. Turning east as instructed, she soon spotted the massive oak standing alone in a small clearing. The crossroads oak, just as Thatcher had described. Clara dismounted, carefully tied Scout to a low branch and approached the tree. The hollow was exactly where Thatcher had said a perfect natural mailbox, hidden from casual observation. She deposited the letters inside, then remounted quickly, eager to return to Freedom's edge. She was halfway back when Scout suddenly stopped, ears pricked forward. Clara tensed, scanning the trail ahead. There, where the path narrowed between two rocky outcroppings, stood a man, one of the riders who had accompanied Harlan and Wallace that morning. Clara's hand moved to her pocket, feeling the reassuring shape of the revolver. But before she could decide whether to flee or continue forward, a voice called from behind her. "Hold there, girl." She turned to see another man emerging from the trees, rifle in hand. Trapped. "Well, well," said the man on the trail, approaching slowly. "What have we here?" "Captain Coyle's runaway, out for a pleasure ride." Clara's heart hammered in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm not a runaway. I'm Clara Reed." The men laughed. "Reed, is it?" said the one with the rifle. "That cripple gave you his name, did he? How touching." "What's a little girl doing out here all alone?" asked the first man, now close enough that Clara could smell tobacco and whiskey on his breath. "Exercising my pony," she said, just as Thatcher had instructed. "Now please, let me pass." "I don't think so," said the rifleman. "Captain Coyle would be mighty pleased if we brought you back to town." Clara's mind raced. 2 grown men against 1 small girl. The odds weren't good, but Thatcher hadn't sent her out unprepared. "Mr. Reed knows where I am," she said, playing for time. "He'll come looking if I'm late." "Let him," sneered the first man. "Save us the trouble of going to get him tomorrow." The man reached for Scout's bridle. In that moment, Clara made her decision. She dug her heels into the pony's sides and shouted, "Go!" Scout lunged forward, nearly trampling the surprised man. The rifleman swore and raised his weapon, but Clara was already leaning low over Scout's neck, making herself as small a target as possible. A shot cracked behind her, but whether it was meant to hit or just frighten it, went wide. Scout galloped down the trail, sure-footed, despite the speed. Clara clung to his main heart, thundering as loudly as the pony's hooves. Behind her, she heard shouts and another shot, but distance was already rendering them harmless. They reached Freedom's edge in a lather of sweat and fear. Thatcher was at the gate instantly, rifle ready, face tight with concern. "Riders!" Clara gasped as he helped her down. "2 men, they tried to take me." Thatcher's expression darkened. "Are you hurt?" "No," she said, still trembling from the encounter. "They shot at us but missed." "They won't miss next time," Thatcher said grimly, leading Scout and Clara into the yard and securing the gate behind them. "Did you deliver the letters?" Clara nodded, pride momentarily overcoming her fear. "Yes, Just like you said. Thatcher's hand rested briefly on her shoulder, a gesture of approval that meant more to Clara than any words could have. They're watching the trails, he said, his mind clearly calculating this new development. They'll try to cut us off, prevent help from reaching us. What do we do now? Clara asked, following him into the barn where he began to cool down the winded scout. We finish preparing, Thatcher replied, his voice calm despite the gravity of their situation. And we get ready for a long night. As dusk approached, they completed their preparations. Thatcher positioned lanterns strategically around the cabin and barn, some lit, some not, to make it harder for them to know where we are, he explained. He showed Clara a trap door beneath the pantry that led to a root cellar. If things go badly, he said, you hide here. There's food water and a tunnel that leads to the creek bed. Follow it north, and it will take you to Reverend Abernathy's church. Clara stared at the hidden door. You had this all planned. Not for this exactly, Thatcher admitted. During the war, this place was a stop on the Underground Railroad. The tunnel helped many people reach freedom. The irony wasn't lost on Clara. And now it might save me. If necessary, Thatcher agreed. But let's hope it doesn't come to that. As night fell, they ate a simple meal of cornbread and beans. Neither had much appetite, but Thatcher insisted they keep up their strength. Afterward, he checked all the weapons one final time, while Clara filled water buckets and positioned them near doors and windows. When there was nothing left to do but wait, they sat by the fire. Thatcher took out his Bible and began to read aloud, not fire and brimstone, but passages of comfort and courage. The familiar words wrapped around Clara like a blanket, calming her racing thoughts. Mr. Reed, she said during a pause in his reading, can I ask you something? He looked up. Of course. Why didn't you leave? After Elizabeth died and Joshua was taken, why stay in Texas, where people hate you? Thatcher was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. Partly because I thought Joshua might be brought back here, he finally said. Partly because leaving felt like surrendering to Harlan, to hate, to everything I fought against in the war. He closed the Bible gently. Mostly, though, because this land is worth fighting for. Not just the acres and buildings, but what they represent. A place where promises matter. Where freedom isn't just a word in a document, but something real people can touch and hold. Clara nodded, understanding. Like the flag. Like the flag, he agreed. Symbols matter, Clara. They remind us what we're fighting for when the fight gets hard. They fell silent again, listening to the pop and crackle of the fire. The occasional hoot of an owl outside the soft creak of the cabin settling for the night. Normal sounds that now felt precious, possibly fleeting. I should check the perimeter once more, Thatcher said, rising from his chair. Can I come? Clara asked, not wanting to be alone. He considered, then nodded. Stay close. They stepped onto the porch, the night air cold against their faces. The moon was nearly full, casting the homestead in silver light. Everything looked peaceful, ordinary. The barn, the corral, the flagpole with the stars and stripes, hanging limp in the still air. Thatcher led the way around the cabin, checking each window, each approach. Clara followed close behind, eyes straining against the darkness beyond the circle of moonlight. They were near the woodpile when Thatcher suddenly stiffened. Down, he whispered, pulling Clara behind the stacked logs. She crouched beside him, heart racing. What is it? Movement, he murmured. By the creek. Clara peered through a gap in the woodpile. At first, she saw nothing. Then a shadow detached itself from the tree line, then another. men moving low and silent toward the homestead. "They're early," Thatcher said, his voice tight. "Back to the cabin, now." They moved swiftly, keeping low, using the shadows for cover. Once inside, Thatcher bolted the door and moved to the window, peering through a gap in the shutters. "How many?" Clara asked, her voice barely audible. "At least 6 that I can see," Thatcher replied grimly. "Probably more." "What do they want?" Thatcher's face was hard in the lamplight. "To make an example of both of us." Clara's stomach clenched with fear, but she forced herself to remain calm. "What do we do?" "We defend what's ours," Thatcher said, checking his Remington one last time. "Take position by the back window. Watch, don't shoot, unless absolutely necessary. Remember what I taught you." Clara nodded, moving to her assigned post with the small revolver clutched in her hand. Through the gap in the shutters, she could see shadows moving near the barn. Minutes ticked by, tense and silent. Then a voice called out from the darkness. "Reed, we know you're in there. Come out and bring the girl." Harlan Coyle's voice. Closer than he'd been that morning, but still safely beyond rifle range. Thatcher didn't respond, just continued to watch through his window. "Last chance, Reed," Harlan called again. "Send out the girl, and maybe you live through this." When silence again met his demand, Harlan's voice hardened. "Your choice, Yankee." A moment later, a flaming arrow arced through the night sky, landing on the barn roof. Another followed, then another. Within seconds, flames began to lick at the dry wood. "The animals," Clara gasped, moving toward the door. Thatcher caught her arm. "No, that's what they want to draw us out." "But Bessie, the horses, they're in the stone section," Thatcher assured her. "The fire won't reach them quickly. We have time." Another volley of flaming arrows, some hitting the barn, others falling short into the yard. Then came the first gunshot, a rifle crack that sent splinters flying from the cabin's front door. "Get down," Thatcher ordered, positioning himself by the window. More shots followed, peppering the cabin from multiple directions. Thatcher waited patient until a muzzle flash betrayed a shooter's position near the water trough. He fired once, and a cry of pain told Clara his aim had been true. The exchange continued, shots from the darkness, carefully placed return fire from Thatcher. Clara remained at her post, watching the back approaches, the revolver slick with sweat in her palm. Then she saw it, a shadow detaching itself from the darkness, creeping toward the back door. A man with a coal oil can, intent on burning them out. "Mr. Reed," she whispered urgently. "Back door." Thatcher was occupied with shooters at the front. "Can you see him clearly?" he asked without turning. "Yes," Clara said, her mouth dry. "Then you know what to do." Clara raised the revolver with trembling hands, sighted along the barrel as Thatcher had taught her. The man was at the steps now, uncapping the oil can. She fired. The sound was deafening in the confined space. The man yelled, dropping the can, clutching his leg. He staggered back, then fell. "Good girl," Thatcher said, his voice tight with pride and regret. Clara stared at the fallen man, her heart hammering. She had shot someone. Actually, shot them. The reality of it made her stomach turn, but there was no time for that now. The attack intensified, more shots, more flaming arrows. The barn was fully ablaze now, casting a hellish glow over the homestead. In that light, Clara could see their attackers more clearly. At least 10 men using trees and outbuildings for cover as they tightened the noose around the cabin. "They're going to rush us," Thatcher said, reloading his rifle with practiced efficiency despite his single hand. Clara swallowed hard. "We'll help come." If Abernathy got our message. Thatcher's voice was calm, but Clara could hear the strain beneath it. We just need to hold out until dawn. A new sound cut through the gunfire, the terrified whinnying of horses. The fire had reached the stone section of the barn. Thatcher's face tightened with anguish. I have to free them, he said, moving toward the door. No, Clara grabbed his arm. They'll shoot you. I can't let them burn, Thatcher said firmly. Cover me from the window. Shoot at anyone who tries to get a clear shot at the barn door. Before Clara could protest further, he was gone, slipping out the side door and into the chaos of the night. She scrambled to the window, positioning the revolver as he had shown her. Thatcher moved like a shadow, using smoke and darkness for cover as he made his way to the barn. A shooter spotted him and raised a rifle. Clara fired without hesitation, her shot going wide, but forcing the man to duck for cover. Thatcher reached the barn door and wrenched it open. Smoke billowed out along with the panicked animals Bessie, the cow, then Valor Scout, the other horses, and finally the goats. They scattered into the night away from the flames. Clara breathed a sigh of relief as Thatcher turned to make his way back to the cabin. He was halfway there when a shot rang out from near the flagpole. Thatcher stumbled, then fell. No! Clara screamed, forgetting all caution. She ran for the door, threw it open, and raced toward Thatcher's crumpled form. Bullets kicked up dirt around her, but none found their mark. She reached Thatcher, fell to her knees beside him. Blood stained his shirt, a lot of blood. Mr. Reed, she sobbed, trying to help him up. Please, you have to get up. Thatcher's eyes fluttered open, glazed with pain. Clara, he gasped. Run! The cellar! Not without you, she insisted, tugging at his good arm. With a groan, Thatcher pushed himself to his knees, then his feet leaning heavily on Clara. Together, they staggered toward the cabin as bullets continued to fly around them. They were almost there when Harlan Coyle stepped from behind the woodpile revolver, aimed directly at them. That's far enough, he said, his face twisted with triumph in the firelight. Clara froze, supporting Thatcher's weight, her own weapon empty and useless in her pocket. It's over, Reed, Harlan said, stepping closer. You lose, again. Thatcher straightened slightly, his face pale but determined. Not while I'm breathing. Harlan's smile was cold. That can be arranged. He raised his revolver, aiming at Thatcher's heart. Clara tensed, preparing to throw herself between them, knowing it would be futile, but unable to stand by and watch Thatcher die. The crack of a rifle shattered the night, but it wasn't Harlan who fired. He jerked a look of surprise crossing his face as he stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder. More shots followed, not aimed at the cabin this time, but at the attackers surrounding it. Shouts of confusion rose from Harlan's men. "The marshal!" someone yelled. "It's the federal marshal!" Clara looked toward the ridge and saw them riders, at least a dozen, charging down toward Freedom's Edge. At their head, a man in a long coat badge gleaming in the firelight. Harlan swore, staggering toward his horse. Around the homestead, his men were doing the same, abandoning their positions in the face of this unexpected reinforcement. "This isn't over, Reed," Harlan shouted as he mounted awkwardly, blood staining his coat. "I'll be back for both of you." Then he was gone, galloping into the darkness with his men close behind. Clara turned her attention back to Thatcher, who had slumped against her, his strength failing. "Help!" she called to the approaching riders. "He's been shot!" The marshal reached them first, dismounting in a fluid motion. "Major Reed," he said, kneeling beside them. "Looks like we got here just in time." "Marshal Holtclaw," Thatcher managed his voice weak. "Good timing." "Thank your reverend friend," Holtclaw said, examining Thatcher's wound. "And the girl's letters. Good thing I was already in Cross Creek. investigating reports of labor contract fraud. Clara watched anxiously as the marshal and another man helped Thatcher into the cabin. The bullet had gone through his left shoulder, missing vital organs, but causing significant blood loss. As they worked to treat the wound, Clara stood by, passing bandages and water, when asked, her mind still struggling to process everything that had happened. The barn continued to burn, casting an eerie glow through the windows, but the immediate danger had passed. "Will he be all right?" she asked Marshal Holtzclaw when they had finished bandaging Thatcher's shoulder. "He's tough," Holtzclaw assured her. "Lost some blood, but the bullet went clean through. With rest and care, he'll mend." Thatcher, lying pale but conscious on his bed, beckoned Clara closer. "You did well," he whispered. "Braver than most men I know." Clara took his hand, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "I was so scared." "Being scared doesn't matter," Thatcher said. "What you do while you're scared, that's what counts." Marshal Holtzclaw approached the bed. "Major, we need to talk about Coyle and Judge Wallace. This wasn't just about the girl, was it?" Thatcher's eyes met Clara's, then returned to the marshal. "No," he admitted. "It goes deeper, much deeper." "I thought as much." Holtzclaw nodded. "We've been tracking a network of labor contract fraud across 3 counties. Children sold into what amounts to slavery despite the law." "Harlan Coyle is part of it," Clara said, finding her voice. "He took my mother. He's taken others." "And my son," Thatcher added, his voice strengthening with resolve. "Joshua, taken 8 years ago when he was 5. The marshal's eyebrows rose. "I didn't know about your boy, Major." "Few do," Thatcher said. "But it's time the truth came out. All of it." Holtzclaw nodded grimly. "We'll get statements from both of you in the morning. For now, rest. My men will keep watch." As the marshal left to oversee his deputies, Clara remained by Thatcher's side. Outside, the fire was being brought under control, the barn a lost cause, but the cabin and other structures saved. "I should have told you before," Thatcher said quietly. "About Joshua. About all of it." "You told me enough," Clara assured him. "And now we'll find him. Together." Thatcher's eyes, bright with fever and determination, held hers. "Together," he agreed. As dawn broke over freedom's edge, Clara stepped onto the porch to watch the sun rise. The homestead was a scene of destruction. The barn a smoking ruin, the yard churned to mud, bullet holes peppering the cabin walls. But the flagpole still stood, the stars and stripes, lifting in the morning breeze. Marshal Holtzclaw joined her, offering a cup of coffee. "Your home took a beating," he observed. Clara straightened her shoulders. "It's still standing," she said. "Like us." The marshal studied her thoughtfully. "Major Reed said you want to testify against Coyle." "Yes," Clara said without hesitation. "For my mother, for Mr. Reed's son, for all of them." "It won't be easy," Holtzclaw warned. "Coyle has friends in high places." "So do we," Clara replied, thinking of Reverend Abernathy, of Marshal Holtzclaw himself, of all who had come to their aid. The marshal smiled slightly. "So you do." He looked out over the damaged homestead. "Rebuilding will take time." "We have time," Clara said with quiet confidence. "And we have each other." Inside the cabin, Thatcher slept fitfully, his wounded shoulder bandaged, but his spirit unbroken. Clara knew the road ahead would be difficult, testifying against Harlan, searching for Joshua, rebuilding freedom's edge. But for the first time since her mother was taken, she faced the future without fear. She touched the red ribbon Thatcher had given her, now tied around her wrist like a promise. Not her mother's ribbon, but a new one, a symbol of freedom, not just remembered, but fought for and won. Whatever came next, she would face it, as Clara Reed, standing tall in her own boots on her own land. No longer property to be sold, but a person with a name, a home, and a purpose. The fight wasn't over. But this battle, at least they had survived. And sometimes survival itself was victory enough. 3 days passed in a haze of pain and fever for Thatcher Reed. The bullet wound in his shoulder, though not immediately life-threatening, had become infected. Clara barely left his side, changing bandages, spooning broth between his parched lips, and placing cool cloths on his burning forehead. Marshal Holtzclaw had left 2 deputies at Freedom's Edge, while he returned to San Antonio with statements from both Clara and a briefly lucid Thatcher. The deputies Jenkins and Morales helped with repairs and kept watch, though there had been no sign of Harlan Coyle or his men since the night of the attack. "He'll be back," Deputy Jenkins warned, as he helped Clara patch bullet holes in the cabin walls. "Men like Coyle don't give up easy." "Neither do we," Clara replied, her voice stronger than she felt. On the morning of the 4th day, Clara woke to find Thatcher's fever broken. His eyes were clear for the first time since the shooting, though pain still etched lines around his mouth. "The barn," he said, his first coherent words in days. "Gone," Clara admitted, helping him sip water. "But the animals are safe. Most ran into the woods during the fighting. The deputies helped me round them up yesterday." Relief softened Thatcher's features. "And you're all right." "I'm fine," she assured him. "Marshal Holtzclaw took our statements. He's gone to San Antonio to file charges against Harlan and Judge Wallace." Thatcher's expression darkened. "Charges won't stop them. Not men like that." "The marshal left deputies Jenkins and Morales to help us," Clara said. "And Reverend Abernathy visits every day. He's bringing some men from his congregation to help rebuild the barn." Thatcher struggled to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at his wound. "We need to be ready. Harlan won't wait for legal proceedings. Not when he's cornered." Clara gently pushed him back down. "You need to rest. The deputies are keeping watch." Thatcher reluctantly subsided, but his eyes remained troubled. "Clara, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said before." The gravity in his voice made Clara's heart skip. "What is it?" "The box under the floorboards in my room," he said. "Did they find it during the attack?" Clara shook her head. "No, it's still there. I checked." Relief flickered across his face. "Good. Inside that box is everything I've gathered over the years about Harlan's operation, names, dates, locations, and information about Joshua." His voice caught slightly on his son's name. "Including where I believe he was taken." Clara's eyes widened. "Where?" "A plantation called Beaumont in Louisiana," Thatcher said. "Owned by Harlan's cousin. I tracked Joshua there 3 years ago, but by the time I arrived he'd been moved. At least that's what they told me." His hand clenched on the blanket. "I never believed it." "Why didn't you tell me?" Clara asked, hurt coloring her voice. "Because it's dangerous knowledge," Thatcher replied, "the kind that gets people killed. I didn't want to put that burden on you." Clara straightened her spine. "It's my burden too now. We're family, remember?" A ghost of a smile touched Thatcher's lips. "Yes, we are." He reached for her hand. "The documents in that box need to get to Marshal Holtzclaw. If anything happens to me—" "Nothing's going to happen to you," Clara interrupted fiercely. "If anything happens," Thatcher continued steadily, "you take those papers and get them to the marshal. Promise me." Clara swallowed hard. "I promise." Later that day, as Clara fed the animals in their temporary pen behind the cabin, Deputy Morales approached. Unlike Jenkins, who was a gruff veteran with a perpetual scowl, Morales was younger with kind eyes and a gentle manner that put Clara at ease. "How's the major doing?" he asked, helping her distribute feed to the chickens. Better, Clara said. His fever broke this morning. Morales nodded approvingly. He's tough, your guardian. Not many men could survive what he has. Clara smiled slightly. He's teaching me to be tough, too. I can see that. Morales glanced toward the ridge where Harlan and his men had first appeared. Jenkins is riding to Cross Creek for supplies. I'll be keeping watch while he's gone. Clara followed his gaze, a chill running through her despite the afternoon sun. Do you think they're out there watching us? Morales didn't sugarcoat his answer. Probably. Men like Coyle don't accept defeat easily, especially from a colored girl and a one-armed Yankee. Clara appreciated his honesty. Too many adults tried to shield her from hard truths, as if she hadn't already lived through worse than most could imagine. Mr. Reed says we need to be ready, she said, that Harlan won't wait for legal proceedings. Morales nodded grimly. The Major's right. That's why the Marshal left us here. He hesitated, then added, but you should know we can't stay forever. Once the Major's well enough to travel, Marshal Holtzclaw wants you both in San Antonio, where he can protect you properly until the trial. Leave freedom's edge. Clara's stomach twisted at the thought. But this is our home. Sometimes protecting what matters means stepping away for a time, Morales said gently. Just until it's safe. Clara didn't respond, but her mind was already turning over possibilities. If they left, would there be anything to come back to? Would Harlan burn what remained of freedom's edge to the ground in their absence? That evening, as Clara prepared a simple supper, a knock at the door made her freeze. Deputy Morales, who had been cleaning his rifle at the table, was instantly alert, motioning for Clara to stay back as he approached the door, weapon ready. "Who's there?" he called. "Reverend Abernathy," came the familiar voice. "With friends." Morales relaxed slightly, but kept his rifle handy as he opened the door. The Reverend stood on the porch, accompanied by 3 men Clara didn't recognize. "Evening, Deputy," Abernathy said, his deep voice reassuring in the gathering dusk. "We've come to help with repairs, if the offer's still welcome." Morales lowered his rifle and stepped aside. "Always welcome, Reverend. Especially with extra hands." Abernathy introduced his companions, Samuel, a carpenter, Marcus, a former slave who had served with the Union Army, and Jacob, a young man barely out of his teens who had a talent for working with animals. All were members of Abernathy's congregation and had volunteered to help rebuild Freedom's Edge. "The women of the church send this," Abernathy added, presenting Clara with a basket containing bread preserves and a carefully wrapped apple pie, "and their prayers for Major Reed's recovery." Tears pricked Clara's eyes at this unexpected kindness. "Thank you," she managed. "Would you like to see him? He's awake today." Abernathy nodded, following Clara to Thatcher's room, while the other men spoke with Morales about the work needed on the homestead. Thatcher was propped up on pillows, his face still pale, but his eyes alert. He smiled weakly when he saw the Reverend. "Abernathy, good to see a friendly face." "You look terrible, Major," Abernathy said frankly, settling into the chair beside the bed. Thatcher's laugh turned into a grimace of pain. "Feel worse, believe me." Clara left them to talk, returning to the kitchen to serve the welcome visitors. As she set out plates and cups, she could hear snatches of the men's conversation plans for rebuilding the barn, reinforcing the cabin, digging a proper well closer to the house. For the first time since the attack, Clara felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps Freedom's Edge could be restored after all. Perhaps they wouldn't have to abandon it. After supper, as the men discussed construction plans, Clara slipped away to check on Thatcher. She found him and Reverend Abernathy deep in serious conversation that ceased abruptly when she entered. "What is it?" she asked, immediately suspicious. What's wrong? The two men exchanged glances. Then Thatcher sighed. Show her, he said to Abernathy. The Reverend reached into his coat and withdrew a folded newspaper. The San Antonio Gazette, he explained, handing it to Clara. Yesterday's edition. Clara unfolded the paper, scanning the front page until her eyes landed on a headline that made her blood run cold. Federal Marshal murdered in ambush. Holtzclaw found dead. Near Cross Creek investigation ongoing. No, she whispered, sinking onto the edge of Thatcher's bed. He can't be. I'm afraid it's true, Abernathy said gently. Shot from ambush 2 days ago on his way to San Antonio with your statements. Harlan, Clara said the name like poison on her tongue. Almost certainly, Thatcher agreed, his voice tight with anger and grief. Though they'll never prove it, Clara's mind raced. The deputies, do they know? Not yet, Abernathy replied. News travels slowly out here. We need to tell them, Clara insisted, rising. They need to be on guard. Thatcher caught her arm. Wait, there's more. He looked to Abernathy, who continued gravely. Judge Wallace has issued warrants for both of you. For Major Reed, it's assault and attempted murder of law officers Harlan's men during the attack. For you, Clara, it's escape from a legal labor contract and theft of property. That's absurd, Clara protested. We were defending ourselves, and I'm not property. Of course it's absurd, Thatcher said. But with Holtzclaw dead, our statements never reached San Antonio. It's our word against theirs, and in this county their word carries more weight. Clara sank back onto the bed, the full weight of their situation crashing down on her. What do we do? Thatcher and Abernathy exchanged another look. We have to leave, Thatcher said finally. Tonight, if possible. Abernathy has offered to help us reach San Antonio by a different route where we can speak directly to the federal court. Leave Freedom's Edge, Clara echoed, just as she had with Morales earlier. But this is our home. Home is people, not places, Thatcher said gently. We'll come back when it's safe, I promise. Clara looked between the two men, seeing the grim resolve in their faces. What about the deputies? Won't they try to stop us if they know about the warrants? That's why we need to move quickly, Abernathy said, before word reaches them. Clara's mind whirled with the implications. Where would we go? My church first, Abernathy replied. Then south to San Antonio by wagon. I have friends along the way who will help us. The Underground Railroad, Clara realized. Abernathy nodded. Still needed even all these years after emancipation. Clara turned to Thatcher. Can you travel your wound? I'll manage, he said firmly. I've endured worse. A sudden commotion from the main room interrupted their planning. Deputy Morales's voice raised in alarm, followed by the sound of boots on the porch. Clara rushed to the door, Abernathy close behind. Deputy Jenkins had returned from Cross Creek, his face grim as he burst into the cabin. We've got trouble, he announced. Big trouble. What's happened? Morales asked, rising from his chair. Marshal Holtzclaw's been killed, Jenkins said. Ambushed outside of town, and Judge Wallace has issued warrants for Reed and the girl. Clara and Abernathy exchanged glances. The news had traveled faster than they'd anticipated. There's more, Jenkins continued, oblivious to their reaction. Coyle's assembled a posse, 20 men at least, all armed. They're headed this way, should be here by dawn. A heavy silence fell over the room. The Reverend's friends looked uncomfortable, clearly calculating their chances against such overwhelming odds. You need to go, Clara said to them. All of you. This isn't your fight. It's everyone's fight, Marcus said firmly, his hand instinctively touching the faded Union Army insignia he still wore on his coat. Freedom always is. Deputy Morales looked between them, confusion evident on his face. What's going on here, Reverend? Did you know about the marshal? Abernathy nodded solemnly. I just told them. I came as soon as I heard. Jenkins's eyes narrowed suspiciously. And what exactly were you planning? Before Abernathy could answer, Thatcher appeared in the doorway of his room, leaning heavily against the frame. To get Clara to safety, he said, his voice steady despite his obvious weakness. The warrants are false, Jenkins. You know that. Jenkins studied him for a long moment. Maybe I do, he finally said, but I've got orders. You and the girl are to be detained and brought to Judge Wallace for questioning. Questioning? Clara couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. Is that what they're calling a lynching these days? Jenkins flinched as if struck. Now see here. No, you see, Thatcher interrupted, straightening, despite the pain it clearly caused him. Harlan Coyle is running a child trafficking operation across 3 counties. He took my son 8 years ago. He's taken dozens of others, colored and white. Marshal Holtzclaw was killed because he was bringing evidence to San Antonio, evidence that would have implicated Judge Wallace as well as Coyle. The deputies exchanged glances. That's a serious accusation, Major, Morales said carefully. It's the truth, Clara insisted. And I can prove it. All eyes turned to her. Without waiting for permission, she moved to Thatcher's room and knelt beside the bed, prying up the loose floorboard he had described. The wooden box was there, just as he'd said. She withdrew it and returned to the main room. Everything is in here, she said, placing the box on the table. Names, dates, locations. Evidence Marshal Holtzclaw never got to see. Jenkins approached the box cautiously, as if it might contain a rattlesnake. May I? At Thatcher's nod, he opened it. Inside were dozens of carefully organized documents, letters, contracts, financial records, maps with locations marked in red ink, and a small leather journal. 8 years of investigation, Thatcher said quietly, following every lead, documenting every connection. It all points to Harlan Coyle and a network that extends from Texas to Louisiana. Jenkins picked up the journal, leafing through its pages, filled with Thatcher's neat handwriting. His expression grew increasingly troubled as he read. This is comprehensive, he finally said, looking up at Thatcher with new respect. If even half of this is true— And it's all true, Thatcher said firmly. Every word. The deputy closed the journal and returned it to the box. Morales and I need to talk, he said. Privately. The 2 deputies stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind them. In their absence, the tension in the cabin was palpable. Will they help us? Clara asked Thatcher. I don't know, he admitted. They're good men, but they're also lawmen. Oaths matter to them. Clara touched the red ribbon tied around her wrist. What about oaths to justice, to truth? Those are the hardest to keep, Abernathy said solemnly, especially when they conflict with the letter of the law. After what seemed an eternity, the door opened and the deputies returned. Jenkins's face was unreadable as he surveyed the group. Morales and I have made a decision, he announced. We can't openly defy a judicial warrant. That would make us no better than the men we're sworn to apprehend. Clara's heart sank. However, Jenkins continued, we also can't ignore compelling evidence of serious crimes. This box needs to reach the federal court in San Antonio. He turned to Abernathy. Reverend, how fast can you get these people out of here? Relief washed over Clara like a wave. You're helping us. Not officially, Morales said with a small smile. Officially, you overpowered us and escaped during the night. We'll be unconscious for several hours, unable to pursue. Meanwhile, Jenkins added, I'll ride to San Antonio by a different route. taking the evidence directly to Judge Federale. With luck, I can secure federal protection for all of you before Coyle realizes what's happening." Thatcher nodded, respect evident in his gaze. "Thank you." "Don't thank us yet," Jenkins warned. "You've still got to get out of here before Coyle's posse arrives at dawn. And the Major's in no condition to ride hard." "My wagon's hidden in the trees," Abernathy said. "We can make him comfortable there."
"You'll need a diversion," Marcus suggested. "Something to make them think you've gone in a different direction."
"The tunnel," Clara said, suddenly remembering the escape route Thatcher had shown her. "It leads to the creek bed. We can make it look like we fled north while actually heading south." Jenkins nodded approvingly. "Good thinking. Morales and I will help stage the scene before we allow ourselves to be overpowered." As the men discussed logistics, Clara slipped back into Thatcher's room to gather essential supplies. She packed a small bundle, changes of clothes, the photograph of Elizabeth Thatcher's Bible, and her mother's red ribbon, carefully wrapped in a handkerchief. As she worked, a floorboard creaked behind her. She turned to find Thatcher watching from the doorway, his face drawn with pain, but his eyes clear and determined. "You should be resting," she admonished gently. "No time for rest," he replied. "Clara, I need you to be prepared for what might happen. The journey won't be easy, especially for me." Clara swallowed hard. "You'll make it. We both will." "I'll try," Thatcher promised. "But if I don't—" He hesitated, then continued firmly. "The evidence is what matters. Getting it to Judge Federale. Finding Joshua." "We'll find him together," Clara insisted. Thatcher's smile was tinged with sadness. "I hope so. But promise me, if you have to choose between helping me or getting that evidence to San Antonio, you choose the evidence. For Joshua. For all the children Harlan has taken." Clara wanted to protest, to insist that she would never leave him behind. But the gravity in his eyes stopped her. This wasn't just about them anymore. It was about justice for countless victims. "I promise." She finally whispered the words, like ash in her mouth. An hour later, their preparations were complete. Deputy Morales had helped Thatcher into the back of Abernathy's covered wagon, making him as comfortable as possible on a bed of straw and blankets. Clara had gathered their supplies and the precious box of evidence. The Reverend's friends had created false trails leading north, including footprints emerging from the hidden tunnel. Jenkins and Morales were preparing for their part in the deception, allowing themselves to be subdued and left tied up in the cabin. Clara approached them as they discussed how to make their bonds appear genuine while being easy to escape from later. "Thank you," she said simply, "for believing us." Jenkins looked down at her, his gruff demeanor softening slightly. "Truth has a way of making itself known, girl, even to thick-headed lawmen like us." "What will happen to you after?" she asked. "When they find out you helped us, don't you worry about that," Jenkins said firmly. "We can take care of ourselves." Clara nodded, though a concern still knitted her brow. "Be careful. Harlan is dangerous." "So are we," Morales assured her with a wink. As Clara turned to go, Jenkins called after her. "Girl, Clara." She looked back. "You're stronger than most men I've known," he said, surprising her with his earnestness. "Whatever happens, don't forget that." Clara straightened her spine. "I won't." Outside, the night was clear and cold, stars strewn across the Texas sky like diamonds on black velvet. Clara climbed into the wagon beside Thatcher, who lay pale but alert among the blankets. Abernathy took the driver's seat while his friends mounted their horses to serve as outriders and scouts. "Ready?" the Reverend asked, looking back at them. Thatcher reached for Clara's hand, gripping it firmly. "Ready," he answered for both of them. With a soft command to the horses, Abernathy set the wagon in motion. They moved slowly at first, careful to minimize noise and disturbance as they left the homestead. Only when they reached the shelter of the pine forest did they pick up pace, the wagon swaying gently over the uneven ground. Clara looked back once at freedom's edge, a lump forming in her throat. The cabin stood dark and silent, the charred remains of the barn, a black scar against the star-filled sky. The flagpole was just visible, the stars and stripes hanging limp in the still night air. "We'll come back," Thatcher murmured, seeing her expression. Clara nodded, blinking away tears. "I know." They traveled through the night, following old hunting trails and dry creek beds to avoid the main roads. Samuel rode ahead, as Scout Marcus and Jacob flanking the wagon as guards. Despite the precautions, every snapping twig, every night bird's call made Clara tense, expecting Harlan's men to materialize from the darkness. Thatcher drifted in and out of consciousness, the jolting of the wagon aggravating his wound. Clara watched him anxiously applying fresh bandages when blood seeped through the old ones, helping him sip water during his lucid moments. "Tell me about Joshua," she said during one such period, hoping conversation might keep him alert. "What was he like?" A ghost of a smile touched Thatcher's lips. "Fearless," he said, "even as a toddler. Elizabeth used to say he'd climb to the moon if we didn't watch him." His voice softened with memory. He had her eyes blue as Texas bluebonnets, and her laugh. "Do you think he'll remember you?" Clara asked gently. "I don't know," Thatcher admitted. "He was only 5 when—" He swallowed hard. "But I'd know him anywhere. A father knows his child." Clara thought of her own mother, wondering if Lita would recognize her now. So much had changed in the year since they'd been separated. "We'll find him," she promised again. "And we'll make Harlan pay for what he's done." Thatcher's eyes, fever-bright in the darkness, held hers. "Justice, not vengeance," he reminded her. "There's a difference." Clara nodded, though in her heart the line between the two had begun to blur. Near dawn, they reached Abernathy's church, a humble wooden structure on the outskirts of a small freedmen's settlement south of Cross Creek. The Reverend's wife, Martha, a dignified woman with silver-streaked hair, was waiting with hot food and fresh bandages. "You're safe here for now," she assured them as she helped Clara tend to Thatcher's wound. "No one will look for you in the colored settlement." "How long can we stay?" Clara asked, watching as Martha applied a poultice of herbs to Thatcher's inflamed shoulder. "A day at most," the older woman replied. "Just long enough for him to regain some strength, and for us to arrange the next stage of your journey." Clara nodded, exhaustion suddenly overwhelming her. She hadn't slept in nearly 24 hours, and the strain of the escape had drained what little energy she had left. Martha noticed her drooping eyelids. "There's a cot in the back room," she said kindly. "Rest while you can, child. I'll watch over him." Clara wanted to protest, to insist on staying by Thatcher's side, but her body betrayed her. With a grateful nod, she retreated to the small room Martha had indicated, collapsing onto the narrow cot without even removing her boots. She dreamed of her mother, not as she had last seen her, frightened and tearful as they were separated, but as she had been before, strong, smiling, reading by candlelight, with Clara nestled against her side. In the dream, Lita looked up from her book and spoke words Clara couldn't quite hear, though they seemed desperately important. She was jolted awake by a hand on her shoulder. Jacob, the youngest of Abernathy's friends, stood over her, his expression urgent. "Miss Clara, you need to come quickly," he said. "Riders approaching from the north." Clara was instantly alert, fear slicing through her fatigue. "Harlan." "We think so," Jacob confirmed. Reverend Abernathy says to get ready to move. Clara grabbed her small bundle of possessions and hurried to the main room of the church where Thatcher was being helped to his feet by Marcus and Samuel. His face was gray with pain, but his jaw was set with determination. "We need to go," Abernathy said as soon as he saw her. A group of riders was spotted crossing Miller's Creek. "They'll be here within the hour." "How did they find us so quickly?" Clara asked, helping to gather their supplies. "They must have picked up our trail despite the false tracks," Samuel surmised grimly. "Coyle probably has trackers with him." Martha appeared with a basket of food and a bundle of fresh bandages. "The wagon's ready," she reported, "and I've sent word ahead to the Johnsons. They'll be expecting you." Abernathy nodded gratefully to his wife. "Clara, you and the Major will continue south with Samuel and Jacob. Martha and I will stay here to misdirect any pursuit." "But they'll know you helped us," Clara protested. "Let them try to prove it," Martha said with quiet dignity. "We have friends here, too." There was no time for lengthy farewells. Within minutes, Clara and Thatcher were settled in the back of the wagon now disguised as a peddler's cart, with Samuel at the reins. Jacob would ride ahead as scout, while Marcus remained with the Abernathys to help defend the settlement if necessary. As they prepared to depart, Thatcher reached out to clasp Abernathy's hand. "I won't forget this," he said hoarsely. "Neither will I," Clara added, embracing Martha briefly. "Go with God," Abernathy said solemnly, "and with speed." The wagon lurched forward, beginning the next stage of their journey south toward San Antonio and the hope of justice. Clara sat beside Thatcher, watching the small church recede behind them, praying they hadn't brought danger to the doorstep of those who had shown them such kindness. "They'll be all right," Thatcher murmured, reading her thoughts. "Abernathy's survived worse." Clara nodded, though worry still gnawed at her. "How much farther to San Antonio?" 3 days if we're lucky," Samuel answered from the driver's seat. "Maybe 4 with the Major's condition." Clara glanced at Thatcher, whose eyes had closed again, his breathing shallow but steady. "He needs a doctor." "The Johnsons have a healer," Samuel assured her. "She'll know what to do." They traveled in tense silence, taking back roads and trails through increasingly rugged terrain. Jacob returned periodically with reports no sign of immediate pursuit, but smoke rising from the direction of the settlement. "What does that mean?" Clara asked, fear clutching at her heart. "Could be anything," Samuel said, though his expression was grim. "A cooking fire, a controlled burn." He didn't voice the worst possibility, but Clara heard it anyway. Retaliation. By midday, they reached the Johnson farm, a small but prosperous holding tucked into a hidden valley. Mrs. Johnson, a stern-faced woman with capable hands, took one look at Thatcher and ordered him brought into the house immediately. "Bullet wound fever infection," she diagnosed briskly. "He needs rest, clean bandages, and my willow bark tea." Clara hovered anxiously as Mrs. Johnson and her daughter Sarah cleaned and redressed Thatcher's wound. The angry red streaks of infection had spread, and his skin burned with renewed fever. "Will he be all right?" Clara asked, unable to keep the tremor from her voice. Mrs. Johnson's expression softened slightly. "He's strong, and the bullet passed clean through. But infection's a killer, if not treated properly." She handed Clara a cool cloth. "Keep his fever down. I'll brew the tea." Left alone with Thatcher, Clara gently bathed his face and neck with the damp cloth. His eyes fluttered open, focusing on her with difficulty. "Clara," he whispered. "The box. It's safe," she assured him. "Right here beside the bed." He seemed to relax slightly. "Good. That's good." His gaze drifted around the unfamiliar room. "Where are we?" "The Johnson farm. Mrs. Johnson is making medicine for you. Thatcher nodded weakly. Johnson, I remember. Station on the railroad. His eyes closed again. So tired, Clara. Rest, she urged. I'll keep watch. As Thatcher drifted back into uneasy sleep, Clara sat vigil beside him, the precious box of evidence clutched in her lap. Outside, she could hear Samuel and Jacob conferring with Mr. Johnson, their voices low but urgent. Clara knew they couldn't stay long a day at most, like at the church. Then, back on the road pushing south toward San Antonio and the federal court, toward justice for her mother, for Joshua, for all the children Harlan Coyle had stolen, toward a reckoning long overdue. She touched the red ribbon on her wrist, drawing strength from its symbolism. Freedom wasn't just a word. It was a promise her mother had believed in, a promise Thatcher had fought for, a promise Clara herself was now pledged to defend. Whatever came next, she would face it as Clara Reed, not as property to be sold, but as a person with a name, with rights, and with the courage to stand for both. The sun was setting, painting the small room in hues of gold and amber, when the shout came from outside. Riders coming, at least a dozen armed. Clara's heart leapt to her throat as she rushed to the window. In the distance, a cloud of dust marked the approach of horsemen moving fast toward the Johnson farm. Harlan Coyle had found them. "Get down!" Mr. Johnson shouted, rushing into the house. "Everyone away from the windows!" Clara hurried back to Thatcher's bedside. "We have to move," she urged, shaking him gently. "Riders coming. Probably Harlan." Thatcher's eyes opened clearer than they had been for hours. The urgency in Clara's voice had cut through his fever haze. "How many?" he asked, struggling to sit up. "At least a dozen," Clara replied, helping him. "Mr. Johnson—" "No time for talk," Johnson interrupted, a shotgun in his hands. "They'll be here in minutes. Samuel and Jacob are readying the wagon, but they won't outrun horses, not with the Major in his condition." Mrs. Johnson appeared in the doorway, her stern face set with determination. "The cellar," she said. "It's our only chance." Her husband nodded. "Sarah, help Clara get the Major downstairs. Martha, bring food and water. I'll hold them off as long as I can." "Alfred," Mrs. Johnson protested, fear flashing across her face. "I'll be fine," he assured her, though his eyes told a different story. "Just a friendly farmer suspicious of strangers. They have no reason to harm me." Clara knew better. Harlan Coyle needed no reason for cruelty. But there was no time to argue. With Sarah's help, she got Thatcher to his feet. He swayed dangerously, but remained upright, one arm slung across Clara's shoulders. "The box!" he gasped, nodding toward the evidence. Clara grabbed it, clutching it to her chest with her free hand. Together they shuffled across the room to where Mrs. Johnson was pulling back a rug, revealing a trap door in the wooden floor. "It's not much," she said, lifting the door to expose a narrow ladder descending into darkness. "But it's kept folks safe before." Sarah went first, then helped ease Thatcher down the ladder. Clara followed with the box, and finally Mrs. Johnson, who pulled the trapdoor closed above them. The cellar was small and musty, lit only by a single lantern Sarah had brought down. Root vegetables hung from the ceiling, and shelves lined the walls stocked with preserves and supplies. "There's a tunnel," Mrs. Johnson whispered, pointing to a low opening in the far wall. "Leads to the creek bed. If things go bad up there, you go through it and head south. Follow the creek to the Miller farm. They'll help you." Clara nodded, her throat tight with fear and gratitude. "Thank you." Above them, they heard the thunder of approaching hooves, then voices, men shouting, doors slamming. Mr. Johnson's voice, steady but strained, asking what business brought armed men to his farm. Then Harlan Coyle's unmistakable drawl, "Looking for fugitives, farmer. A one-armed Yankee and a colored girl. Seen 'em?" "Can't say I have," Johnson replied evenly. "Just me and my family here." "Mind if we look around?" Harlan's tone made it clear it wasn't a request. "My wife's unwell," Johnson said. "I'd appreciate if you'd respect our privacy." A harsh laugh. "Privacy's a luxury in these times, friend. Boys, search the house and barn. Be thorough." Heavy boots stomped overhead, moving from room to room. Clara held her breath, one arm around Thatcher, who leaned heavily against her, his face gray with pain and exhaustion. Mrs. Johnson and Sarah huddled together, their expressions tense but resolute. The footsteps paused directly above them. Dust sifted down between the floorboards. "What's under here?" a gruff voice demanded. "Root cellar," Johnson answered. "Nothing but potatoes and preserves." "Open it." A tense silence. Then Johnson's voice, firmer now. "No, you've seen the house. My wife needs rest, not more disturbance." "Open it," the voice repeated. "Or we open it for you." Clara looked at Mrs. Johnson in panic. The older woman pointed urgently toward the tunnel. "Go," she mouthed. "Now." Clara hesitated. Leaving meant condemning the Johnsons to Harlan's wrath, but staying meant certain capture and the end of any hope for justice. Thatcher seemed to read her thoughts. "The evidence," he whispered weakly. "For Joshua. For your mother." Above they heard a scuffle, then the crack of a blow and Mrs. Johnson's cry of alarm. The trapdoor rattled as someone began prying it open. "Go," Mrs. Johnson hissed, pushing Clara toward the tunnel. "We'll be all right. Go." With a wrenching feeling in her chest, Clara helped Thatcher to the tunnel entrance. It was barely large enough for them to crawl through the dirt walls, close and confining. Sarah thrust a bundle into Clara's hands, food, water, bandages, then turned back to her mother's side as the trapdoor began to give way. "Thank you," Clara whispered, then ducked into the tunnel, pulling Thatcher in after her. They crawled in desperate silence, Clara leading, Thatcher following with agonizing slowness. The precious box of evidence was tucked under Clara's arm, its weight and bulk making the narrow passage even more difficult. Behind them, they heard the trapdoor crash open and angry voices fill the cellar. "Where are they?" Harlan's voice cold with fury. "I don't know what you're talking about," Mrs. Johnson replied, defiant even now. A sharp crack, the sound of a slap, and Sarah's cry of outrage. "The tunnel!" someone shouted. "They've gone through the tunnel." "After them!" Harlan ordered. Clara increased her pace, fear giving her strength she didn't know she possessed. Thatcher struggled behind her, his breathing labored, occasionally muffling groans as the crawling aggravated his wound. "Leave me," he gasped. "Take the box and go." "No," Clara said fiercely. "We stay together." The tunnel seemed endless, the darkness absolute except for the faint glow from the lantern Sarah had thrust into Clara's bundle. Behind them, they could hear their pursuers entering the tunnel, their curses echoing in the confined space. Finally, Clara felt cool air on her face. The tunnel opening loomed ahead, a pale circle in the darkness. She scrambled out into the twilight, then turned to help Thatcher. He emerged on his hands and knees, collapsing onto the creek bank with a groan of pain. Fresh blood stained his bandages, his wound reopened by the desperate crawl. "We have to keep moving," Clara urged, glancing fearfully at the tunnel entrance. "They're right behind us." Thatcher struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on Clara. "Which way?" he gasped. "South," Clara said, remembering Mrs. Johnson's instructions. "Follow the creek to the Miller farm." They stumbled forward, Thatcher's arm across Clara's shoulders, her small frame straining under his weight. The creek bed provided some cover, its banks high enough to shield them from view if they stayed low. The twilight deepened around them, stars appearing one by one in the darkening sky. Behind them, they heard shouts as their pursuers emerged from the tunnel. Clara quickened their pace, ignoring the burning in her legs, the ache in her shoulders. "Clara," Thatcher whispered, his voice fading. "I can't. Much further. Just a little more," she encouraged, though she had no idea how far they still had to go. Just a little. A shot cracked through the evening air. Dirt kicked up inches from their feet. "There they are," someone shouted. Down in the creek bed, more shots followed, forcing Clara and Thatcher to crouch lower, using the creek bank for cover as they stumbled forward. "Leave me," Thatcher insisted, again his voice stronger now, despite his weakness. "I'm slowing you down. Take the box and run." "No," Clara said fiercely. "I won't leave you." "Clara." Thatcher stopped, gripping her shoulders with surprising strength. "Listen to me. You promised." "The evidence is what matters. Getting it to Judge Federale. Finding Joshua." Clara shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "We find him together. And we will." Thatcher said, his gaze intense despite the fever brightening his eyes. "But one of us has to make it to San Antonio. One of us has to finish this." Another volley of shots closer now. Their pursuers were gaining. Thatcher pressed something into Clara's hand, his Remington revolver. "You remember how to use it?" Clara nodded, her throat too tight for words. "Good girl," Thatcher said softly. Then, with a surge of strength, he pushed himself away from her and staggered into the open, drawing himself up to his full height. "Coil!" he shouted, his voice ringing across the creek bed. "I'm here. Come and get me." "No!" Clara cried, reaching for him. Thatcher looked back at her, his face calm despite the pain. "Run, Clara," he said quietly. "For Joshua. For your mother, run, and don't look back." Then he was moving away from her, drawing their pursuers' attention, giving her the chance to escape. Clara stood frozen, torn between her promise to Thatcher and her desperate need to protect him. The box of evidence weighed heavy in her arms, a physical reminder of what was at stake. "There he is!" came a shout. "It's Reed!" Shots rang out. Thatcher stumbled but remained upright, continuing to draw their attention away from Clara's position. With a sob tearing at her throat, Clara made her choice. Clutching the box and the Remington, she turned and ran south along the creek bed, staying low and using the growing darkness for cover. Behind her, she heard more shots. Then Harlan's voice triumphant. "We got him! We got the Yankee!" Clara ran blindly, tears streaming down her face, her heart a cold stone in her chest. The bundle from Sarah bounced against her side, the box of evidence clutched desperately in her arms. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs threatened to buckle, putting as much distance as possible between herself and Harlan's men. Only when she could run no further did she collapse behind a fallen tree, gasping for breath, the full weight of what had happened crashing down on her. Thatcher was captured, perhaps dead. The Johnsons were at Harlan's mercy, and she was alone miles from San Antonio, with only the evidence box and Thatcher's revolver to her name. "I'll come back for you," she whispered into the darkness, a promise to Thatcher, to the Johnsons, to herself. "I'll bring help. I swear it." After allowing herself a few precious minutes of rest, Clara opened the bundle Sarah had given her. Inside she found bread, dried meat, a small canteen of water bandages, and to her surprise, a folded map with a route marked in pencil. South to the Miller farm, then beyond to San Antonio. Sarah or her mother must have included it, knowing Clara might have to make the journey alone. Clara traced the route with her finger, estimating the distance. At least 2 days on foot, maybe more. But she had no choice. The evidence had to reach Judge Federale. It was the only way to save Thatcher, to find Joshua, to bring Harlan Coyle to justice. Tucking the map into her pocket, Clara took a small sip of water and a bite of bread to fortify herself. Then, using the stars to orient herself as Thatcher had taught her, she continued south. The night deepened around her, the Texas wilderness full of unfamiliar sounds, the hoot of owls, the rustle of nocturnal creatures, the whisper of wind through grass and trees. Clara walked steadily, keeping the creek on her right, the bundle and box clutched close. Near midnight, a distant sound made her freeze hoofbeats approaching from the north. Harlan's men still searching. Clara ducked into a thicket of scrub oak, making herself as small as possible, hardly daring to breathe as the riders passed within 50 yards of her position. "Spread out," she heard one order. "The girl can't have gotten far." "What about Reed?" another asked. "Coyle's taking him back to town. Wants to make an example of him." "Hanging? Eventually. But Coyle ain't in a hurry. Wants to make him suffer first." The riders moved on, their voices fading into the night. Clara remained hidden, her mind racing with this new information. Thatcher was alive, at least for now. Being taken back to Cross Creek or Bellstone, where Harlan and Judge Wallace would orchestrate some mockery of justice before executing him. She had to reach San Antonio quickly. It was Thatcher's only hope. When she was certain the riders were gone, Clara continued her journey south, moving more cautiously now, alert for any sign of pursuit. The night hours blurred together, exhaustion and fear creating a dreamlike state where only the next step, the next hill, the next landmark mattered. Dawn found her still walking, her legs leaden, her eyes gritty with fatigue. The creek had widened, joining a larger stream that flowed through a shallow valley. According to the map, the Miller farm should be nearby, just beyond the next rise. Clara approached cautiously. After the Johnson farm, she was wary of bringing danger to another family. She scouted the property from a distance first, a modest homestead with a small house, a barn, and fields of corn and cotton stretching toward the horizon. No sign of Harlan's men, but no guarantee they hadn't been here already. Clara hesitated, weighing her options. She needed rest food, perhaps a horse, if the Millers were willing to help. But approaching openly might be dangerous for her and for them. Her decision was made for her when a young boy, perhaps 10 years old, emerged from the barn and spotted her at the edge of the property. He stared for a moment, then ran toward the house, shouting for his parents. Clara tensed, ready to flee, but before she could move, a woman appeared on the porch. Tall, gray-haired, a shotgun in her capable hands. "Who's there?" she called. "Show yourself." Taking a deep breath, Clara stepped into the open, her hands raised to show she meant no harm. "My name is Clara Reed," she called back. "Mrs. Johnson sent me. I need help." The woman studied her for a long moment, then lowered the shotgun slightly. "Johnson, you say Martha Johnson?" Clara nodded. "Yes, ma'am, from the farm north of here." "Come closer, child," the woman said, her expression softening slightly. "You look half dead on your feet." Clara approached cautiously, still wary despite the woman's seemingly friendly demeanor. "Are you Mrs. Miller?" "I am," the woman confirmed. "And you're the girl they're hunting, aren't you? The one traveling with the one-armed Union man?" Clara froze. "How did you know?" "Riders came through last night," Mrs. Miller said grimly, asking questions, making threats. "Said you were fugitives, dangerous." She studied Clara's exhausted, dirt-streaked face. "You don't look dangerous to me, just scared and tired." "We're not fugitives," Clara said wearily. "We're witnesses against Harlan Coyle and Judge Wallace. They're running a child trafficking operation across 3 counties. Mrs. Miller's eyes widened slightly. Then she nodded as if something had been confirmed. "Come inside," she said. "Quickly, before you're seen." The Miller farmhouse was warm and welcoming, the scent of baking bread filling the air. Mrs. Miller's husband, a burly man with kind eyes, looked up from his breakfast in surprise as Clara was ushered in. "Esther, who's this?" he asked. "Martha Johnson's girl, Mrs." Miller replied, though Clara had never claimed to be such. "She needs our help, John." Mr. Miller seemed to understand immediately. "The riders last night," he said. "They were looking for her." "Yes," his wife confirmed. "And we're going to help her reach San Antonio." Clara sank gratefully into the chair Mrs. Miller offered, setting the precious evidence box on the table beside her. "Thank you," she said, her voice cracking with exhaustion. "But I can't stay long. They captured Mr. Reed, my guardian. They're taking him back to town for trial, but it won't be a real trial. They'll hang him." The Millers exchanged concerned glances. "Eat first," Mrs. Miller insisted, placing a bowl of porridge and a cup of coffee before Clara. "Then we'll talk." Clara ate mechanically, too tired to fully appreciate the hot food. The Miller's son, introduced as Daniel, watched her with undisguised curiosity from across the table. "Is it true you shot a man?" he asked suddenly. "Daniel," his mother scolded. "Mind your manners." Clara set down her spoon. "Who told you that?" "The men last night," Daniel replied, unabashed. "They said you and a Yankee cripple shot up half of Cross Creek." "That's not true," Clara said firmly. "We defended ourselves when they attacked our home. That's all." Mrs. Miller placed a protective hand on her son's shoulder. "Daniel, go help your father with the horses. Miss Reed needs rest, not questions." When the boy had gone, Mrs. Miller sat across from Clara. "Tell me everything," she said quietly. "From the beginning." Clara hesitated, then reached for the evidence box. "It might be easier to show you." She opened the box and spread some of the documents on the table, contracts similar to the one Harlan had forged for her, lists of children's names with prices beside them, maps marking transfer points, and holding areas. Mrs. Miller's face grew increasingly grim as she examined the evidence. "This is—" she began, then shook her head, words failing her. "Evil," Clara finished for her. "Pure evil. And it has to be stopped." "These children," Mrs. Miller said, touching a list of names with trembling fingers. "Where are they now?" "Some in Texas," Clara replied. "Others sent to Louisiana to plantations where they're worked like slaves despite the law. Mr. Reed's son Joshua was taken 8 years ago. We think he's at a place called Beaumont Plantation." Mrs. Miller's hand flew to her mouth. "Beaumont. You're certain?" Clara nodded, suddenly alert despite her exhaustion. "You know it." "My sister worked there years ago," Mrs. Miller said slowly, "before she got out. It's a terrible place. Owner's name is Edmund Coyle." "Harlan's cousin," Clara confirmed, her heart racing. "You know where it is?" "Near Shreveport," Mrs. Miller replied. "About 100 miles east of here, across the Louisiana border." Clara's mind whirled with this new information. Beaumont Plantation was real, not just a name in Thatcher's notes. Joshua might truly be there, along with other children Harlan had trafficked over the years. "I have to get these documents to Judge Federale in San Antonio," she said urgently. "And then I need to find Joshua." Mrs. Miller studied her thoughtfully. You care for this boy you've never met. He's Mr. Reed's son, Clara said simply, and I know what it's like to be taken from your family. The older woman nodded, seeming to come to a decision. John can take you to San Antonio, she said. He's delivering cotton tomorrow. You can hide in the wagon. They'll be watching the roads, Clara warned. Not all the roads, Mrs. Miller replied with a small smile. John knows ways the law doesn't. Relief washed over Clara so profound she felt tears threaten. Thank you, she whispered. I don't know how to repay you. Stop these men, Mrs. Miller said firmly. Save those children. That will be payment enough. Clara nodded, her resolve strengthening despite her exhaustion. I will. I promise. Mrs. Miller showed Clara to a small room off the kitchen where she could rest until John was ready to depart for San Antonio. The bed, though simple, felt like heaven to Clara's weary body. She placed the evidence box and Thatcher's Remington carefully beside her before allowing her eyes to close. Sleep claimed her immediately, but it was restless, filled with dreams of Thatcher calling for help, of her mother's face fading into darkness, of children crying for families they'd never see again. She woke with a start to find Mrs. Miller gently shaking her shoulder. It's time, the older woman said softly. John's ready. Clara sat up momentarily disoriented. The room was dark. She had slept through the day into evening. How long until San Antonio? She asked, gathering her meager possessions. If all goes well, you'll be there by noon tomorrow, Mrs. Miller replied. John knows a judge there, not federale, but someone who can get you to him safely. Clara followed Mrs. Miller to the kitchen where John Miller waited, dressed for travel. Daniel was there too, solemn-faced and clearly disappointed at being left behind. The wagon's loaded, John said. Cotton bales stacked to leave a hollow in the center. You'll be hidden, but it won't be comfortable. I don't need comfort, Clara assured him. Just safe passage. Mrs. Miller handed Clara a bundle food, a canteen of water, a blanket for the night journey. For the road, she said. And this. She pressed something small and hard into Clara's palm. Clara opened her hand to find a silver locket. Inside was a tiny portrait of a woman who bore a striking resemblance to Mrs. Miller. My sister, Mrs. Miller explained. She worked at Beaumont. If you find yourself there, show this to the house servants. Tell them Esther Miller's sister sent you. They might help. Clara closed her fingers around the locket, deeply moved by this unexpected gift. I'll treasure it, she promised. Outside, the wagon waited piled high with cotton bales. John showed Clara how to climb in through a gap in the back, wriggling into the hollow space he'd created in the center of the load. Stay quiet, stay still, he instructed. If we're stopped, don't make a sound, no matter what happens. Clara nodded, clutching the evidence box to her chest as she settled into her hiding place. John arranged the bales to conceal her completely, leaving just enough space for air to circulate. Ready? He asked. Ready, Clara confirmed, though her heart hammered with apprehension. The final bale was shifted into place, plunging her into darkness. She heard John climb onto the driver's seat, the creak of leather as he settled the soft commands to the horses. Then they were moving the wagon, swaying gently as it rolled away from the Miller farm. Clara curled around the evidence box, her most precious possession. In the darkness of her cotton cave, she whispered a prayer for Thatcher, for the Johnsons, for all those who had helped her on this desperate journey, for Joshua, wherever he might be, for her mother, whose fate remained unknown. I'm coming, she promised them all. I'm bringing help. Just hold on. The wagon rumbled on through the night, carrying Clara toward San Antonio and the hope of justice, toward a reckoning that would change lives across 3 states. toward a truth too long buried in forged contracts and midnight kidnappings. She fingered the red ribbon tied around her wrist, not her mother's, but Thatcher's gift. A symbol of freedom not just remembered, but fought for, died for, if necessary. Freedom wasn't free. Clara understood that now more deeply than ever before. It was purchased with courage, with sacrifice, with the willingness to stand against evil, no matter the cost. As Texas farmland rolled by unseen beyond her cotton sanctuary, Clara made another silent vow to honor that cost, to bear witness to that sacrifice, to carry the fight forward, no matter what awaited her in San Antonio. She was Clara Reed now, not property, not a contract, not a victim, a person with a name with rights, with a voice that would be heard, a person who would see justice done whatever it took. The wagon hit a rut, jolting Clara from her thoughts. From somewhere ahead came voices, men calling for the wagon to halt. John's voice steady but strained, asking what business brought armed men to a public road at night. Then Harlan Coyle's unmistakable drawl, "Looking for fugitives, farmer. A colored girl with stolen property. Mind if we check your load?" Clara's blood ran cold. She pressed herself deeper into the cotton, one hand on Thatcher's Remington, the other clutching the evidence box. The moment of truth had arrived. "Routine cotton delivery," John Miller replied, his voice remarkably steady. "Headed for San Antonio Market." Clara lay perfectly still in her hiding place, barely daring to breathe. The evidence box was clutched against her chest, Thatcher's Remington ready in her hand. Through the cotton bales, she could hear men dismounting, boots crunching on the gravel road. "That's a lot of cotton for a small farmer," Harlan observed, his tone suspicious. "Bringing in for neighbors, too," John explained. "Saves us all on transport costs." "Mind if we check your load?" "It's sealed and weighed," John protested. "Market inspector won't take it if the seals are broken." A harsh laugh. "Seals can be replaced, farmer. Now step down from that wagon." Clara heard John climb down, his movements slow and deliberate. Then came the sound of men moving around the wagon, prodding at the cotton bales. "Nothing unusual, Captain," one reported. "Just cotton." "Check underneath," Harlan ordered. "And inside. That girl's small enough to hide anywhere." The wagon creaked as someone climbed aboard. Cotton bales shifted above Clara, letting in thin shafts of moonlight. She held her breath, finger resting lightly on the Remington's trigger. "Looks clean," came the report, after several tense minutes. "Just cotton all the way through." Clara almost sagged with relief. The hollow John had created was cleverly designed, with bales arranged to appear solid, while concealing her in their midst. "Where are you coming from, farmer?" Harlan asked, clearly reluctant to give up the search. "My place north of here," John replied. "Been a long day. I'd like to make the Prescott crossing before midnight, if you don't mind." A long silence. Clara could almost feel Harlan's suspicion warring with his lack of evidence. "Let me see your papers," he finally demanded. More rustling as John presumably produced his identification and transport documents. Clara used the distraction to shift slightly, easing a cramp in her leg, while trying to remain absolutely silent. "Everything seems in order," Harlan admitted grudgingly after several minutes. "But I've got men watching every road to San Antonio. If you're hiding that girl, we'll find her." "I'm just delivering cotton," John insisted. "Nothing more. For your sake, I hope that's true," Harlan replied, menace dripping from every word. "Because harboring fugitives is a hanging offense in this county." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Clara's fingers tightened around the Remington, her protective instincts flaring. If they threatened John, she would reveal herself rather than let him suffer on her account. But the moment passed. Boots crunched on gravel again as Harlan and his men remounted. Move on, Harlan ordered. And remember, we're watching. The wagon lurched forward as John urged the horses onward. Clara remained frozen in her hiding place, listening intently for any sign that they were being followed. After what seemed an eternity, the wagon turned onto a rougher road, the familiar rhythm of the main highway giving way to the irregular jolts of a lesser-used trail. "Miss Reed," John's voice came low and urgent. "They're gone, for now." Clara finally allowed herself to breathe normally. "Thank you," she called softly. "That was too close." "We're taking the back trails to San Antonio," John explained. "Longer, but safer. Try to rest if you can. It'll be morning before we reach the city." Rest seemed impossible with danger so close, but Clara's exhausted body had other ideas. The steady rocking of the wagon, combined with the warmth of her cotton nest, eventually lulled her into an uneasy doze. She dreamed of Thatcher not wounded and captured, but standing tall beside her on the porch of Freedom's edge, the American flag snapping in the breeze above them. In the dream, he pointed toward the horizon where a figure approached on horseback. A boy with blue eyes like Texas bluebonnets. Joshua. Clara jerked awake, momentarily disoriented in the darkness of her hiding place. The wagon was still moving, but slower now, and the quality of light filtering through the cotton had changed. Dawn had come. "Miss Reed," John called softly, "we're approaching San Antonio. I need to know where to take you." Clara wriggled into a more upright position. "Judge Federale," she replied. "Do you know where to find him?" "The federal courthouse is in the center of town," John said. "But it'll be watched. We need another way in." Clara remembered Mrs. Miller's words. "You know a judge here, don't you? Someone who can help us reach Federale." A pause. Then, "Judge Hawkins, he's a good man, owes me a favor from the war." "Can we trust him?" "With our lives," John confirmed. "I'll take you there first." The wagon rumbled on the sounds around them, gradually changing as they entered the outskirts of San Antonio. More traffic voices speaking both English and Spanish, the general bustle of a growing city. Clara remained hidden, though the temptation to peek out at her surroundings was strong. After what seemed hours more, the wagon finally came to a stop. Clara heard John climb down, then muffled conversation with someone she couldn't see. Footsteps approached the wagon, and a male voice, cultured and authoritative, spoke just beside her hiding place. "Miss Reed, I'm Judge Hawkins. John has explained your situation. It's safe to come out now." Clara hesitated, years of hard-earned caution making her wary. "How do I know it's really safe?" A gentle laugh. "A prudent question. You're in my private stable. The doors are closed. My groom is trustworthy, and there are no witnesses beyond the three of us." Still cautious, Clara shifted several cotton bales and emerged from her hiding place, blinking in the sudden light. Judge Hawkins was a tall, distinguished man with silver hair and kind eyes that reminded her unexpectedly of Thatcher. He offered her a hand, helping her climb down from the wagon. "You've had quite a journey, young lady," he observed, taking in her disheveled appearance and the precious box she clutched to her chest. "Yes, sir," Clara agreed, straightening her spine despite her exhaustion. "And it's not over yet. I need to see Judge Federale immediately. It's a matter of life and death." Hawkins nodded gravely. "So John has explained. Fortunately, William Federale is an old friend. He's expecting us." Clara's eyes widened. "You've already contacted him. John sent word ahead yesterday," Hawkins explained. "A trusted messenger. Federale has been discreetly making preparations since last night." Relief made Clara's knees weak. She hadn't dared hope for such efficiency, such readiness to help. "What about Mr. Reed?" she asked urgently. "My guardian. He's been captured by Harlan Coyle. They're planning to hang him." Hawkins's expression darkened. So we've heard. A rider from Cross Creek arrived this morning with news of a public trial scheduled for tomorrow. Judge Wallace presiding. It won't be a real trial, Clara said bitterly. Just a show before they kill him. Indeed, Hawkins agreed. All the more reason to act quickly. Come, my carriage is waiting. We'll go to Federale immediately. After quick farewells to John Miller, who would continue with his cotton delivery as if nothing unusual had occurred, Clara found herself in Judge Hawkins's elegant carriage bowls hidden behind drawn curtains. The judge sat opposite her, his expression thoughtful as he studied the box on her lap. That contains the evidence, I presume? Clara nodded. Everything Mr. Reed gathered over 8 years. Names, dates, locations, proof of what Harlan Coyle and Judge Wallace have been doing. May I see? Clara hesitated, then carefully opened the box and handed him several key documents, the ledger showing children's names and prices, maps of transport routes, and a detailed account of Joshua Reed's abduction. Hawkins examined them with growing horror. This is monstrous, he finally said. A systematic trafficking operation using fraudulent labor contracts as cover. And you say this has been happening for 8 years. At least, Clara confirmed. Since Mr. Reed's son was taken, probably longer. Hawkins returned the documents with hands that trembled slightly. You've shown remarkable courage, Miss Reed. Few adults would have managed what you've accomplished. Clara looked down uncomfortable with the praise. I just did what needed doing. For Mr. Reed. For the children. For justice, Hawkins added softly. The carriage rolled through the streets of San Antonio, Clara catching occasional glimpses of the bustling city through gaps in the curtains. It was larger and more vibrant than she had imagined, with buildings of stone and brick rising several stories, streets filled with people of diverse backgrounds, and an energy that spoke of growth and possibility. They arrived at a grand stone building with columns flanking its entrance. Federal marshals, instantly recognizable by their badges and stern expressions, waited discreetly at a side door. Hawkins helped Clara from the carriage and ushered her inside, the marshals falling in around them protectively. Clara clutched the evidence box tighter as they moved through hushed corridors, finally entering a spacious office where a distinguished man in his 60s sat behind a massive desk. He rose as they entered, his keen eyes immediately finding Clara. Miss Reed, he said warmly, I'm Judge William Federale. I've been very eager to meet you. Clara curtsied slightly, remembering her manners despite the urgency of their situation. Thank you for seeing us, Your Honor. The honor is mine, Federale assured her, gesturing for them to sit. Few adults would have shown your perseverance in bringing this evidence to light. Clara placed the box on his desk. It's all here, sir. Everything Mr. Reed gathered about Harlan Coyle's operation. Names of children taken, places they were sent, people involved. And proof that Judge Wallace has been protecting them. Federale opened the box with reverent care, quickly scanning its contents. His expression grew increasingly grim as he examined document after document. This is extraordinarily comprehensive, he finally said, looking up at Clara with new respect. Major Reed was thorough in his investigation. Yes, sir, Clara agreed. But they have him now. They're planning to hang him tomorrow after a fake trial. We have to stop them. Federale exchanged glances with Hawkins. The situation is complex, Miss Reed. Cross Creek is outside my immediate jurisdiction. I cannot simply ride in and take control. Clara's heart sank. But you're a federal judge. Surely you have more authority than Judge Wallace. In federal matters, yes, Federale confirmed. And this trafficking operation certainly qualifies. But I need time to issue proper warrants to organize a sufficient force of marshals to coordinate with local authorities who aren't compromised. "We don't have time," Clara protested, desperation edging her voice. "Mr. Reed doesn't have time." Federale's expression was sympathetic but firm. "I understand your urgency, Miss Reed, but rushing in without proper preparation could result in more deaths, not fewer, including potentially Major Reed's." Clara fought back tears of frustration. After everything she'd endured to reach San Antonio, to face yet another obstacle seemed unbearable. "Is there nothing we can do?" she asked, her voice small. Federale considered her thoughtfully. "I didn't say that," he replied. "I said I need time for official action. Unofficially." He trailed off, looking to Hawkins. The other judge nodded slightly. "The Jenkins option." "Precisely." Federale agreed. Clara looked between them, confused. "What's the Jenkins option?" "Not what, but who," Federale explained. "Marshal Samuel Jenkins. Former Texas Ranger, current federal marshal. He was in Cross Creek investigating labor contract fraud when Marshal Holtzclaw was killed." Clara's heart leapt. "The deputy who helped us, who took our statements." "The same," Federale confirmed. "He managed to reach San Antonio yesterday, bringing word of Holtzclaw's murder and your situation. He's preparing to return to Cross Creek now with a small team of trusted men." "Unofficially," Hawkins added carefully. "A reconnaissance mission only," Federale clarified. "To assess the situation and, if possible, delay the proceedings until official warrants can be executed." "I want to go with them," Clara said immediately. Both judges stared at her in astonishment. "Absolutely not," Federale said firmly. "It's far too dangerous. You're safe here now, under federal protection." "Mr. Reed needs me," Clara insisted. "I know Cross Creek. I know the people who might help us. And—" She hesitated, then continued with quiet determination, "I made him a promise to see this through to the end." "You've more than fulfilled any promise," Hawkins said gently. "Bringing this evidence to San Antonio was the crucial step. The rest can be handled by professionals." Clara shook her head stubbornly. "I have to go. If you won't help me, I'll find my own way back to Cross Creek." The judges exchanged concerned glances. "She's serious," Hawkins observed. "So I see." Federale sighed. He studied Clara thoughtfully. "You realize that returning to Cross Creek puts you directly in harm's way, that Harlan Coyle and his men will be looking for you." "Yes, sir," Clara said firmly, "but I won't hide while Mr. Reed faces death, not when I might help save him." Another long silence as Federale considered her words. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Very well. I'll speak with Jenkins. The decision will ultimately be his, as he's leading the mission. But I'll tell him my recommendation that you be allowed to accompany them under strict conditions and protections, of course." Relief flooded through Clara. "Thank you, Your Honor." "Don't thank me yet," Federale warned. "This is highly irregular and potentially very dangerous. But I've learned that sometimes irregular methods are necessary when facing extraordinary evil." He rang a small bell on his desk, and moments later a clerk appeared. "Bring Marshal Jenkins to my chambers immediately," Federale instructed. While they waited, Federale continued examining the evidence, occasionally asking Clara to clarify details or provide context for specific documents. She answered as completely as she could, drawing on all that Thatcher had shared with her during their time together. 20 minutes later, the door opened to admit a familiar figure. The gruff deputy who had protected Freedom's Edge after the attack. Now he wore a federal marshal's badge, his expression stern, but his eyes lighting with recognition when he saw Clara. "Miss Reed," he said, tipping his hat. "Glad to see you made it." "Marshal Jenkins," Clara replied, relief evident in her voice. Thank you for helping us at Freedom's Edge." Jenkins nodded acknowledgement, then turned his attention to Judge Federale. "You wanted to see me, Your Honor." "Yes, Marshal. Miss Reed has made a rather unusual request. She wishes to accompany you back to Cross Creek." Jenkins's bushy eyebrows shot up. "With all due respect, that's out of the question. We're riding into a hornet's nest. No place for a child." "I'm not just a child," Clara protested. "I know Cross Creek. I know the people who might help us. And Mr. Reed is my guardian." "All the more reason to keep you safe," Jenkins countered. "What do you think Reed would say if I let you ride back into danger?" Clara lifted her chin. "He'd say I'm stubborn as a Texas mule, but he'd also understand that some promises have to be kept no matter the cost." A hint of a smile tugged at Jenkins's mouth. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that." He turned back to Federale. "What's your position, Judge?" "Officially, I cannot endorse bringing a minor into a potentially dangerous situation," Federale said carefully. "Unofficially, I believe Miss Reed's knowledge of the area and its people could prove valuable, and I suspect she'll find her way back to Cross Creek with or without our assistance." Jenkins studied Clara thoughtfully, clearly weighing the risks against the potential benefits of her presence. "There would be conditions," he finally said. "Non-negotiable." "Name them," Clara replied immediately. "You stay with the group at all times. You follow orders without question. You wear a disguise to avoid recognition. And at the first sign of serious danger, you retreat to safety with whoever I assign to protect you. Agreed?" Clara nodded without hesitation. "Agreed." Jenkins sighed clearly, still troubled by the arrangement. "I must be losing my mind," he muttered. "Fine, she can come, but I want it on record that I consider this extremely irregular." "So noted," Federale said gravely, though Clara thought she detected a glimmer of approval in his eyes. "Now, let's discuss strategy. The trial is scheduled for tomorrow morning. 10 o'clock in the town square," Jenkins confirmed. "Wallace wants an audience. Makes it harder for us to act discreetly." "How many men do you have?" "6 counting myself. All experienced marshals, all trustworthy." Federale nodded thoughtfully. "And Coyle's forces, at least 20 in town, probably more by tomorrow, plus whatever local support Wallace can muster." "Poor odds," Hawkins observed grimly. "We're not planning a frontal assault," Jenkins clarified. "Just a delaying action until official reinforcements can arrive. Create confusion, disrupt the proceedings, maybe even spirit Reed away if the opportunity presents itself." Federale leaned forward. "I'll have warrants prepared by midnight. Official marshals could reach Cross Creek by tomorrow afternoon, but not before the trial begins." "Then we need to ensure there's still a trial in progress when they arrive," Jenkins said firmly. The discussion continued, details of the plan gradually taking shape. Clara listened intently, offering insights about Cross Creek's layout, the personalities involved, and potential allies like Reverend Abernathy. As afternoon faded into evening, final preparations were made. Clara was provided fresh clothes, a short haircut, and boy's attire as a disguise. Judge Hawkins's wife, a kind woman with a no-nonsense manner, supervised the transformation. "There," Mrs. Hawkins said, stepping back to assess her work. "You make a convincing stable boy. No one will look twice at you riding with the marshals." Clara examined her reflection in the mirror, hardly recognizing herself with cropped hair and boy's clothing. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "Just come back safely." Mrs. Hawkins replied, squeezing her shoulder gently. "That will be thanks enough." At midnight, Clara joined Jenkins and his team in the stable yard behind the federal building. 6 grim-faced marshals checked weapons and adjusted saddles, their expressions reflecting the seriousness of their mission. "Ready, boy," Jenkins called loudly, maintaining Clara's cover even here. "Ready, sir," she replied, keeping her voice low as instructed. A small bay gelding had been prepared for her, not as magnificent as Thatcher's valor, but steady and sure-footed. Clara mounted easily, settling into the saddle with the confidence Thatcher had taught her during their brief time together. Judge Federale appeared at the stable door, official documents in hand. "The warrants," he said, passing them to Jenkins. "For Harlan, Coyle, Judge Wallace, and 27 others named in Major Reed's evidence. Charges include kidnapping, fraud, conspiracy, and murder." Jenkins tucked the papers securely inside his coat. "We'll make sure justice is served, Your Honor." "See that you do," Federale replied gravely. His eyes found Clara among the mounted marshals. "Godspeed, Miss Reed. Your courage honors us all." Clara nodded, too full of emotion for words. After all the hardship, the fear, the desperate flight from danger, she was now riding back toward it willingly. Not out of recklessness, but out of love for the man who had given her back her name, her dignity, her sense of self. Jenkins raised his hand, and the small company moved out, hooves clattering on the cobblestones as they left San Antonio behind. They rode hard through the night, taking back trails and deer paths to avoid Harlan's watchmen on the main roads. Dawn found them in familiar territory, the rolling hills and scattered oak trees Clara had come to know during her time at Freedom's Edge. They paused briefly to rest the horses and confirm their approach. "Cross Creek is just beyond that ridge," Jenkins said, pointing north. "We'll circle around and enter from the east, less conspicuous that way." As they prepared to mount up again, Clara noticed Jenkins studying a small portrait by the light of their small campfire. She recognized it immediately, a daguerreotype of a young boy with solemn eyes. "Is that Joshua?" she asked softly, moving to Jenkins's side. The marshal nodded, slipping the image back into his pocket. "Reed gave it to me before we were separated. Asked me to keep it safe." "You know him well, Mr. Reed, I mean." "Served together," Jenkins replied shortly. "Different units, but we crossed paths during Reconstruction. Good man. Stubborn as hell, but good." Clara smiled slightly. "That sounds like him." Jenkins mounted his horse, then looked down at Clara with unexpected gentleness. "We'll get him out, Miss Reed. I promise you that." "I know," Clara said, swinging into her own saddle with practiced ease. "And then we'll find Joshua." They rode the final miles in tense silence, the weight of their mission pressing down on them all. As they crested the last hill before Cross Creek, Clara felt her heart constrict at the sight below. The town was bustling with unusual activity for so early in the morning. People converged on the central square, where a platform had been erected overnight. A platform with a single upright beam and a crossbar. A gallows. Clara's blood ran cold. They were building a gallows in broad daylight, not even pretending this would be a fair trial with a considered sentence. Harlan Coyle intended to hang Thatcher Reed before noon evidence, and justice be damned. "They're not even waiting for the trial," she whispered in horror. Jenkins's face hardened. "Change of plans," he said grimly. "We move now. No more waiting." The marshals exchanged glances, hands moving to weapons. Clara felt a surge of both fear and determination as Jenkins turned to her. "Remember our agreement," he said sternly. "You stay with Deputy Collins at all times. First sign of serious trouble, you retreat." Clara nodded, though in her heart she knew she would not leave without Thatcher, whatever the danger. "Let's go," Jenkins ordered, urging his horse forward. "Time to remind these people about real law." As they rode toward Cross Creek, Clara touched the red ribbon tied around her wrist. Thatcher's gift her promise of freedom. She thought of everything that had brought her to this moment: the auction block in Bellstone, the quiet strength of freedom's edge, the desperate flight through the Texas wilderness, and the evidence now secure with Jenkins and Judge Federale. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she was Clara Reed, not property to be sold or silenced, but a person with a name, with rights, and with the courage to stand for both. And stand she would, beside the man who had taught her what freedom truly meant. Part 5. Conclusion of the story.